It's now 4:30 and I will call the regular meeting of the Camarillo City Council to order mainly for the purpose of a closed session. I'll ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Councilmember Kildee.
Here.
Councilmember Santangelo.
Here.
Councilmember Tremblay.
Here.
Vice Mayor Mulchay.
Present.
Mayor Craven.
Here. Are there any public comments on the closed session? If there's a member of the public who has a public comment on the closed session item only, please raise your hand. I see no hands raised in the participant list. Whoops, wait a minute, let me get to attendees. No, I see no hands raised. So at this time, I'll ask the city attorney to announce the closed session.
Yes, I can do that. It'll be a conference with real property negotiator. The authority is Government Code Section 54956.8. The property is the former library building. That's located at 3100 Ponderosa Drive. The agency negotiators are listed in the agenda. The negotiating parties include Kidstream and Children's Museum. Under negotiation are price and terms of payment.
Thank you. Mr. Kildee, I see that you have your hand raised. Did you want to say something at this time?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I'll lower my hand right now.
At this time, the city council will recess to a closed session, and we'll be back in open session at 5 o'clock.
Okay, looks like the cat and I will call to order this meeting of the Camarillo Library. Let the record reflect that all trustees are present, and we'll do the flag salute. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, do we have any amendments to the agenda?
No amendments to this agenda.
Thank you. Do we have any public comments? Check here. I don't see any hands up. Okay, so we'll go ahead. We'll move on to the consent calendar. We have a motion.
I'll move the approval of consent. I'll
Second.
second.
I don't know who beat that one out, so I'm going
I'll give it to Charlotte.
The second goes to Mayor Craven. And Madam Clerk, can we take the vote, please?
Trustee Craven,
Yes.
Trustee Kildee,
Yes.
Trustee Molshay,
Yes.
President Pro Tem Tremblay,
Yes.
President Santangelo.
Yes.
That motion carries unanimously.
Okay. Do we have any comments from staff
No comments from staff.
and any comments from trustees?
I have a comment or a question if I may, please.
Sure.
Maybe the staff, I know I might be a little premature. Do we have any idea about potential reopening of the library, or at least the process?
Yes, excellent question, sir. John Thomas is prepared to answer that question.
Hi, yes, at the last meeting, that question was raised as well. And in response, I'd like to inform the board that currently we don't have any immediate plans to reopen the library beyond the existing curbside service. And although the statewide stay-at-home order was lifted some weeks ago, the entire county of Ventura remains in the purple tier, which is the designation for widespread risk for catching coronavirus. The city has been and continues to participate in weekly calls with other cities and the county to ensure that our response to current information and conditions remain a coordinated effort. At this time, all 12 of Ventura County's branch libraries and other city libraries are closed to walk-in traffic or offering greatly reduced services. And schools in our area have not yet seen students return to campuses for in-class instruction. On a positive note, we have recently seen a great improvements to our county's metrics and are hopeful that conditions will continue to improve quickly. And so we're regularly evaluating the situation. In anticipation of a future reopening, staff has been working with our library operator, LS&S, to develop plans and protocols allowing the library to open in stages that would coordinate with loosening state and local restrictions. So far, based on feedback from the county and the existing state tiered system, we would likely see any real movement towards a reopening occurring within the orange colored tier. I want to note that the existing curbside service, which is open Tuesday through Saturday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., has been overwhelmingly positive, and the number of calls and emails of concern I've received over the library being closed has been minimal. Again, our numbers show us headed in the right direction, and we'll continue to keep you updated as we are able to progress to a reopening. That's an update for now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Any other comments from trustees? Okay, we'll go ahead and adjourn.
Thank you. We will call this regular meeting of the Camarillo Sanitary District Board of Directors to order. Let the record reflect that all directors are present. Are there any amendments to the agenda?
No amendments to this agenda.
Thank you. Are there any public comments? I don't see any. Jeffrey, do you see any?
No public comment.
All right. We'll move to consent. Do I hear a motion on consent?
Move to approve.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Mayor Craven and a second by Vice Mayor Molche for the consent calendar. Secretary, please call the roll.
Director Craven,
Yes.
Director Kildee,
Yes.
Director Molche,
Yes.
Secretary Santangelo,
Yes.
Chair Tremblay.
Yes,
That motion carries unanimously.
thank you very much. Do we have any comments from staff? Hearing none, any comments from directors? All right, hearing none, we'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting of the Sanitary District.
I'll call the meeting of the Camarillo City Council back to order. And I will also call the special meeting for this evening to order. And ask if there are any amendments to the agenda.
Staff does have one amendment to the agenda, and that is to request that item 5A be heard first after the consent calendar.
Is there any objection to that? Okay, so ordered. Are there any other requests for other amendments to the agenda? Hearing none, we will move on to the consent calendar.
Move consent.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Madam Mayor?
Motion by Councilmember Tremblay, second by Councilmember Santangelo. Could we have the roll call, please?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
sorry, I have to announce a potential conflict of interest on item N on the consent calendar. This parcel where in regards to a grading permit, this parcel is within 36 feet, certainly within 500 feet of my family's business. And so I'm going to abstain when I vote. I will be abstaining on item N.
Okay.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
can I make one quick comment?
Sure.
I just wanted on item C, which is the annual committee reports. I just wanted to thank all our residents that are serving on those committees and thank them for their time and effort and for their reports.
Okay. Could we have the roll call on the consent calendar, please?
I just wanted to confirm that this is the motion for the consent calendar on the regular agenda, and we'll do another motion on the special meeting agenda.
Right, and I'm sorry I didn't clarify that. Was that your motion, Councilmember Tremblay?
Yes, but for efficiency purposes, we could combine it with the special meeting if you want.
Well, our attorney usually likes us to do separately, so let's do one and then the other.
Then let's keep it as is.
Okay, so this is for the regular meeting.
Councilmember Kildee,
Yes.
Councilmember Santangelo,
Yes.
Councilmember Tremblay,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Molche,
Yes, with an
Mayor
abstention on item N.
noted. Mayor Craven,
Yes.
that motion carries unanimously.
I'm sorry, I am lost right now with too many agendas to look at with 3.
The special meeting has the one item for consent, which has to do with Cal OES Hazard Mitigation Grant.
Okay, and that's the agenda I don't have in front of me, but I have a reference to it. So could we have a motion on the consent for the special meeting?
So moved. That's on the Cal OES Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. item.
Right. Is there
I'll
a
move
second?
that.
I'll second.
There's a motion by Councilmember Tremblay, a second by Councilmember Santangelo to approve the consent calendar for the special meeting. Could we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Kildee,
Yes.
Councilmember Santangelo,
Yes.
Councilmember Tremblay,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Molche,
Yes,
Mayor Craven.
Yes.
That motion carries unanimously.
Okay, so as I have it, we now are down to City Council on the regular meeting. The first item is an urgency ordinance temporarily capping fees of third-party delivery services during the local state of emergency due to COVID-19.
So Mayor Craven, we want to jump to item 5A.
You're right. I apologize. Let's go to finance. Item A, CARES Act funding request from the Camarillo Healthcare District for transportation services. Could we have a staff report on that, please?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I need to recuse myself on this item. My family's business, we have a contract right now with the director of the healthcare district, Ms. Ralston. And so due to that conflict of interest, I'm going to recuse myself from any discussion or voting on this item.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. This item is to consider the funding request from the Camarillo Healthcare District for transportation services impacted by the pandemic. The district's Caravan program provides door-to-door transportation to district residents for non-emergency medical appointments and other activities of daily living. The transportation farebacks revenues ceased at the onset of COVID-19 due to the stay-at-home orders of the pandemic, and the healthcare district had requested from the city some funding in the amount of $57,000, which is the estimated lost revenue from the period of March 2020 through the end of this fiscal year, June 2021. Staff had worked with the healthcare district since early December, and we looked at various funding sources that might have been available, looked at the various CARES Act monies that we received. It was not eligible for the Transit CARES Act money, was also not eligible for the 2 different CDBG CARES Act monies. So we're looking at now the general CARES Act money that was coming from the state and from the county for general purposes. And as you recall, 2 weeks ago at the city's mid-year budget review, we indicated that projections show the general fund to end this fiscal year with a surplus. So for your consideration is to approve the funding of this request in the amount of $57,000. And I believe we have a representative from the healthcare district available for questions.
Okay, I've been looking at my panelists and my attendee list, and I don't see anybody from the healthcare district. If you are in attendance.
Kara is available.
I'm on.
Okay.
Can you hear me, Mayor Craven?
Yes, we can hear you. I just
All
don't
right.
see your name.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any particular specific questions at this point, or shall I just express basically our concerns and our appreciation for consideration?
It looks like just express your.
I have a question if you want.
Yes, Mayor, excuse me, Council Kildee.
Yeah, Kara, so the fees were budgeted at about $3,500 a month. So because the service has been curtailed, is it I know you don't refer to it as a fare box recovery, but because of COVID and the lessening of amount of transportation rides that you give, you're not getting the money back in. I'll refer to it as a fare box recovery, as you typically do. Is that correct?
That's correct. Basically, there's been no opportunity to earn revenue, and yet services need to continue for people.
But you are still continuing to serve the public in this. In other words, the system is still operating.
It's still operating, but in a very limited capacity due to resource management, frankly. And that's the genesis of the request.
So Kara, limited capacity, does that mean a call in, or do you have hours of operation, or how specifically do you do that?
We're basically on standby for people. We have a daily wound care, or a daily chemo. I forget which that is right now. But the people, the community members in the shutdown have not been able to, one, go anywhere with the stay-at-home orders, or two, feel like they can afford to use the appropriate transportation services, and therefore they just haven't. That's also one of the largest elements we're dealing with the stay-at-home orders and the pandemic in general. People are not doing their preventative care and their maintenance care and their activities of daily living. Once you get behind on that, you begin a health decline spiral. So what we are interested in, if there are CARES Act funds that are appropriate for this, that we would be able to restore that system, that caravan system, to near full operation and be able to have no fare box required for the time that the money is
And
there.
do you know about how many rides per month that you will provide? And will it be, would you think there'd be an increase this year over last year? You'd think there would be, but do you have any idea about how many rides you were giving a month and what the projections are in the future?
Well, when we talk about this particular amount, this 57,000, and if we were talking about just rides from Camarillo to Camarillo, now some people need to go from Camarillo to a different physician in a different town, but the Camarillo to Camarillo rides would be $40 round trip, and if you take that and do the math in 57, that's 1,400 something rides that we'd be able to provide through the end of June 30th. What we're providing now currently is nowhere near that. People just aren't feeling they can get out. If they knew they had a credible system that was able to deal with their specific health needs, I feel like they will come out and use the service again for their preventive health and maintenance health.
Can I ask just one follow-up, Mrs. Craven?
Sure.
Sorry. Thanks, Kara. This is a little bit off the grid here a little bit, but if in fact we do approve this, is there any thought about maybe adding some rides to the Verdugo location for folks to get their COVID shots or their vaccinations? Obviously not outside of Camarillo, but perhaps in Camarillo could be helpful. So just a suggestion.
I feel like rides to testing and rides to vaccination are going to be a whole lot of that should this be approved. I think that it might even rival some of the preventative health services that people don't like to go do, but everyone is very interested in going to the vaccination sites and the testing sites. I feel like that will be really high. It would be interesting to do that count, but yes, those are destination sites.
That could be part of the program then. Perhaps.
Most certainly.
How do you plan
Thank
to?
you. That's all I have.
How do you plan to announce this to make sure more people know that this is available?
Good question, and thank you. We've been considering that. This would be an announcement through the Acorn and through the Ventura County Star and on our website and on the city's website if they care to. Any other social media aspects in our Healthy Attitudes magazine, and word of mouth. Word of mouth consistently with the people who utilize services at the healthcare district is our top method still. To today is still the top method. So we anticipate a big onslaught. We're almost afraid of this request, but we're ready to support this in those means and do the outreach.
Okay. What are the wishes of the council?
Madam Mayor,
Yes,
are you going to take comments?
I'll take comments or a motion.
I have a question.
Yes. Mr. Tremblay, did you have a question?
I think I'll yield to Susan on this if she has questions, because I just had a comment and I was prepared to make a motion. But
Okay.
go ahead.
It's not for Ms. Ralston, probably staff. I don't know if Mark is there. When we did our budget review, I just wanted to refresh my memory that we had calculated a surplus. And if I remember correctly, this amount, this appropriation was already in that calculation. So in other words, this isn't going to deplete our surplus.
Mr. Uribe?
Yes,
There he is.
I'm, that's a good question. If you could give me a minute, I'll get back on.
Sorry,
that.
yeah.
Thank you.
Surprise.
Madam Mayor, would you, I don't want to interject on Susan's question, but do you want me to make my comment? Would you
Sure.
accept comments while we're waiting for Mr. Uribe? The caravan program to me is essential. It's an excellent service, and kudos to the healthcare district. This is a one-time funding request, and I think the use of the care funding is highly appropriate. It frankly doesn't matter to me whether these are care fund monies that came directly to the city or whether they're being utilized for the healthcare district for what I think is an essential service. So I'm fully supportive of this. With that said, maybe Mr. Uribe has the answer to the question.
Yes, I just needed to confirm. That amount was not included in any of the mid-year adjustments. So it
Okay.
is an additional appropriation requested as part of the action this evening.
Okay.
But her question was, is that going to deplete our surplus?
Yes, that would be pulling additional appropriation. So whatever surplus we projected for the end of the year would be down by this amount, $57,000.
Okay.
Mr. Tremblay?
Oh, no, I'm done with my comments. Thank you. But
Are
I
you going
would
to
like to
make
make
a
a
motion?
motion, if I may. Why don't I go ahead and make the motion to approve and authorize the city manager to execute a funding agreement with the Camarillo Healthcare District for $57,000, which covers the full cost of the caravan program from March 2020 to July 2021.
I'll second.
A motion and a second. Could we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Kildee,
Yes.
Councilmember Santangelo,
Yes.
Councilmember Tremblay,
Yes.
Mayor Craven.
Yes.
That motion carries 4-0 with Vice Mayor Moshe absent.
Mayor Craven? I'm sorry, I'm not
Yes.
hearing. Okay. I just wanted to thank this council very much for understanding what this type of service and this opportunity will mean to the community and to the residents as we move through this. And maybe we're on the tail end of this thing and maybe we can get back on track, but your support of this is so meaningful and I thank you.
You're welcome.
You're very welcome.
Okay, we're now going on to item 4, the city council. Item A, urgency ordinance temporarily capping fees of third-party delivery services during the local state of emergency due to COVID-19. Can we have the staff report on this item, please?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
would you allow me to just make a quick statement before we get into the report?
Okay.
I just wanted, I brought this issue because I had heard concerns from the community and what's happening to our businesses and our restaurants has just weighed really heavily on me. I requested it to be agendized quickly and as an urgency ordinance, because obviously if we decide that this is the way that we want to go, I didn't want there to be a delay. I readily admit that I did not know how complex this was. And so I really appreciate the work that George and the staff have done. Full disclosure, I've met with Carmen and George. Well, we've spoken and they've shared a lot of what they found. There was even a consideration of possibly pulling this, having me kind of pull it back. But I didn't do that for a number of reasons. Councilmember Kildee supported this, and so I felt that he needed to have a say in it as well. But more importantly, I think it's really important that regardless of what our decision is here, that the community sees that we are looking at ways, and even though we don't go with every possibility, we are always looking at ways and deliberating about what's best for our local businesses. So with that being said, I'll let staff take over.
Okay, could we have the staff report, please?
Mayor Craven, council members, good evening. George Winkler here, City's Economic Development Coordinator, and I'll be taking on this item for the evening. So as you know, tonight we'll be reviewing the possibility of an urgency ordinance temporarily capping the fees of third-party delivery services. This item was brought forward at the January 27th council meeting by Council Member Santangelo and seconded by Council Member Kildee. And since that time, staff has conducted extensive research into this topic, and I'll be presenting council with those findings. Let's see. Okay, so on the agenda for this item, we'll be discussing the COVID-19 impact on our local restaurants. We'll be talking about third-party food delivery services, those big four companies that dominate the market share. We'll be sharing our results of our survey with our local restaurants. Staff was able to make contact with representatives from DoorDash and Grubhub to get their side of the story as well. So we're going to bring that to council. We discussed this in detail with our neighboring cities and their economic development staff. We've uncovered some unintended consequences of third-party delivery caps, which could affect our businesses. And we've also uncovered some possible state legislature, which may come out, that was introduced in January. And I'll talk about our proposed ordinance. So as you know, restaurants have had a really difficult period since the beginning of the pandemic. In March, they were subjected to only takeout and delivery. In May, they were told they can reopen for indoor dining at limited capacity and with safety protocols. So they made significant investments to modify the interior of the establishments to make room for social distancing. After that, restaurants were told that they had to move outdoors only and for delivery and pickup. So they once again made significant modifications and invested in outdoor infrastructure. Following that, it got cold and windy, and restaurants once again had to make a few more modifications. And with the recent stay-at-home order, once again, they were brought back to the first stages, which is delivery and takeout. And then most recently, once again, allowed to go back outdoors. So with that being said, that's been a challenge, but the city of Camarillo has been there to support them throughout the way. Back in the beginning, we've helped provide signage and share information on this. We created an open for business page, which shared which restaurants were open, how they were open. We promoted the Great Plate food delivery services to all of the restaurants so they could apply for that program and hopefully make some extra revenues. We created a temporary outdoor dining no-fee zone clearance, or temporary outdoor business no-fee zone clearance, which facilitated outdoor business operations. We also created our temporary outdoor business safety reimbursement program, which supports the creation of safe outdoor dining areas and reimburses the businesses for those expenses for barricades. We've also partnered with the Economic Development Collaborative and Small Business Development Center, and at the Camarillo Ranch provided personal protective equipment to multiple businesses throughout the county. We created an outdoor dining GIS map, which shows all the outdoor dining areas in Camarillo, and we also created a grant program and a loan program. So there's been no shortage of support for the restaurants, but despite that, they have still suffered reduced sales. So using sales tax data, we are able to analyze this. Our fast casual restaurants, like those Urbane Cafes, Baja Freshes, the sales are down 18.6%. Fat casual dining, like Applebee's, Eggs and Things, those restaurants down 21.4%. And the quick service restaurants like McDonald's, Taco Bell's, Jack in the Boxes, those are down 3.8%. So despite all the help, it's still been a significant impact to our businesses year over year. And not to mention that restaurants still face shutdowns or a staff having to take long leaves of absence due to exposure to COVID. So there's no shortage of issues for our restaurants. So we'll talk about the big four companies. We have DoorDash, Uber Eats, Grubhub, Postmates. These are the four third-party delivery service providers that provide 95% of the market share for what is called the convenience culture. So it's worth noting that each one of these businesses has a different business model, and they all rely upon different aspects of that convenience, whether it's delivery or the marketing of the product. but they are aggregators and they do bring together the consumers with the businesses. So they're essentially middleman. So despite the increased revenues that you can see in Q2 2020, particularly for DoorDash and Uber Eats, these companies are still not profitable. So they are still suffering losses. The cost of doing business is quite expensive, even with these caps, even without the caps. So most of these consumers that use these apps only use them one time a month, and they're typically low income or younger individuals. And as you can see, 85% of the customers typically don't like to pay more than $5 for delivery. And it's worth noting that restaurants have a choice in their business model as well. Every business owner has an idea and creates a business based on a business model that they thought that would work. And some businesses, like let's say pizza delivery service, they've baked those costs into the pizza so that when COVID happened, they were readily available to take it on because that was their business model. Whereas other businesses like casual dining, for instance, weren't so used to delivery as a business model. So those that adapted were able to do so, and those that did not were not. And so these are services that provide an extra service to those businesses that did not have that business model to begin with. And consumers have a choice, right? So everybody has a choice is basically where I'm getting at. A consumer can call the restaurant directly, place an order, and go pick it up on their own if they're able to. So it's really about convenience and choice. So here's an example of what a third-party delivery contract looks like from a restaurant in LA. And you can see here, Grubhub, they tend to rely on marketing to run their business model. So they charge 20% fee on average for marketing. This is variable depending on what the business owner chooses to do with Grubhub. And then they have a 10% app, a food delivery fee. So for a $10 order, it's $3 that goes to Grubhub. So DoorDash also has a different business model where they have 20% of the fee is really delivery. They really focus on delivery and what they call their dashers, getting the delivery out to people. So that's their business model. So there are all sorts of business models, and what you're not seeing are those costs behind the services to those businesses. So we'll get into more detail on that too. So we have 161 restaurants in Camarillo. 68% of those utilize third-party delivery apps. Those that don't use the service, they talk about the amount of the fees being charged are just too excessive, and it cuts into their budget. And that's regardless of a cap or not. It's just the business model can't support an additional fee to it. Some restaurants choose to not use the providers because they don't feel that it withholds or upholds the quality of their food or services. So they don't want to use those third-party delivery service. So that's some of the reasons why certain businesses don't use those apps. 44% of those 68% are national chains, and national chains get a discount. So the way that these services work is the more volume there is, the more of a discount they get. So national chains aren't as impacted by these caps. They do benefit from them greatly, but they already negotiate those rates. And every business owner can negotiate those rates. It is just more favorable to the big chains. So we did a survey of our restaurants using our business tax database firsthand. We reached out to all 161 via email, but only got 28 replies. So we felt that wasn't a significant pool of owners. And also we were kind of wondering what were their thoughts based upon their survey, because a lot of times with surveys, people respond, but don't necessarily have a full picture of the idea. And we don't have a full picture of why they responded that way. So we took to the phone. We embarked to call as many restaurants as possible, and we're able to make contact with 63 of the restaurants. So that's 39%. So from our survey, we found online, at least, that 86% of those businesses were in favor. 25% felt there could be a possibility of a negative consequence, and we'll talk about those negative consequences in a bit. As far as our phone survey goes, we reached out and we were able to get a hold of 63, as I mentioned. 49% were impartial to a cap on fees. And the reason why is because they said, even if we did cap fees, 15% is still too high. So they wouldn't be willing to pay it. Once again, you know, they didn't want to lower the quality of their service, or they just really weren't interested in using the service to begin with. So those were the impartial ones. 15% were opposed, and those that were opposed tend to be opposed because they were against the government manipulating with the free market. In addition, you know, those who didn't use the third-party providers felt that it would be giving a competitive edge to their competitors. So by capping the fees, you would actually be helping their competitors succeed when they were already positioned to take on that challenge. So those are some of the reasons that businesses were opposed. Those that were in favor, obviously, restaurants are always looking to cut costs. They're operating on the margins, and the prices are too high, and they could use help getting the costs down. So that was mainly, you know, what they were saying, is that it would be helpful, but they weren't necessarily thinking about some of these unintended consequences. So conversations with representatives from DoorDash and Grubhub were pretty interesting. DoorDash's take is that restaurants have a choice and that delivery is cost intensive. So those that use DoorDash, they found, are 6 times more likely to succeed right now than others. DoorDash, as mentioned, offers food delivery services and marketing to drive orders. But for them, they can see that delivery is the most expensive part of the service. So for 15% on a $20 bill, they would earn $3 with a cap. So the average Dasher gets paid about $22 per hour currently. And the average Dasher is also most likely a restaurant employee that was recently laid off due to COVID. So these are people that rely on that income. So generating $3 doesn't pay for a Dasher. It doesn't pay for the marketing. It doesn't pay for the platform. And it also doesn't take into the fact that you're transacting through the platform, which increases the fees 2 to 3% for processing those fees. So they're paying those fees included in that 15%. So they're not able to make a profit, you know, when we're adding, or when cities add caps. Grubhub, for instance. So this is another one of those companies. Restaurants don't have to use their service, is basically what they're saying, but it's cheaper for a restaurant, and it's faster than hiring their own drivers and building the associated infrastructure. Drivers and insurance are expensive. And so Grubhub really prides itself in giving mom and pop shops the tools to scale. So that's really the marketing, expanding reach, et cetera. So the majority of their business model is focused on marketing and advertising. 50% of their sales don't even lead to independent drivers. They actually end up at pickup in store or delivery. So you can see that they're a bit different. And they believe that they're really a second person selling the business, and that they're good advertising for restaurants. So unintended consequences of third-party delivery caps. DoorDash believes that meddling in the marketplace leads to less volume. When jurisdictions add caps to their commissions, they pass that fee on to the consumer. And what they found is that for each dollar passed on to the consumer, it equals a 5 to 7% drop in volume for the restaurants and for the Dashers, which are their drivers. And there's also a potential for the service areas to contract. So what that means is if a restaurant is too far away, they can't get to it. So by default, the service area shrinks based upon where a restaurant is located and where the customer is located. So if customer is located out of the range of the restaurant, it all of a sudden becomes unfeasible for DoorDash to offer that service. Grubhub, when caps are imposed, the marketing and advertising for the customer or for the business goes down. So they say food orders have gone down 20% for those businesses, and then driver opportunities go down 20%. So they haven't pulled out of markets yet, but they could if they felt the need to pivot their business model. And just last quarter, Grubhub representative mentioned they lost $68 million due to these caps. So the caps aren't taken lightly by these companies, and they may have to change their business model to move on. There's also the possibility that the state will introduce a cap on their own. This Assembly Bill 286 was introduced on January 21st. There isn't much information on it yet, but it's the intent of legislature to enact legislation that would relate to third-party food delivery company fees and commissions. So anything we do here could be superseded by the state at a later date. In talking with the local economic developers from our other cities, the stance is really no across the board. There's either been no interest from their council members, no mentions from their businesses, or just generally they're not really looking into it. Port Hueneme last week did bring this forward to their council, and the council chose not to move forward with this. So there are some uncertainties to the legal ramifications of imposing government caps on the free market, but our legal team has identified some limited risk with that, not major risk. But in Port Hueneme's discussion, they did say it is a big risk for them, particularly to implement the enforcement of this, because it is difficult to enforce. It's really difficult even to get a hold of these companies, just to ask them questions, in all honesty. So some of the areas that did implement caps, the restaurants have still identified that they're paying fees that are the same. So without the enforcement arm, it's really difficult to move forward with this. So tonight we have created an urgency ordinance for consideration if the council chooses to move forward with something like that. And our urgency ordinance would cap food delivery fees at 15%, and it would also ensure 100% of the tips go to drivers as requested in the last 2 meetings ago. So in speaking with Grubhub and DoorDash, some of these conversations are fairly fresh. And they would prefer we modified our ordinance if we were to move forward with it. And so I've listed those requests here if council were to decide to move forward with that. So with that, I'm open to questions or comments.
Okay, I'm going to open it up to council members for questions before we get into comments or a motion. We do have at least one member of the public who'd like to speak to us on this, but are there questions of staff on the report? Mr. Mulchay.
George, I want to thank you and staff for the work you guys put into this. It was extensive, it's obvious, and it's greatly appreciated. I must have missed it. Did we ask exactly what these restaurants right now are paying? I've seen different conflicting reports that that some of these, like Grubhub and or DoorDash, have already offered 15% rates to smaller mom and pop businesses, while still charging something around 30% to larger chains.
Yeah, each restaurant has a different contract with these businesses, and they are supposed to sign a non-disclosure agreement, so they aren't technically allowed to share their rates with us.
Okay. For the record, I know Uber Eats just finished their acquisition of Postmates, so the big four is really technically big three. They closed their acquisition in December, I read. But that was the only question I had.
Mr. Tremblay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. George, what a very good comprehensive report. Thank you. I mean, well above and beyond what was in the staff report. So obviously you've been working on this very hard, and staff have. So great kudos to you. Question is this: On that pending state legislation, AB 286, do you know whether or not that is urgency legislation? And by that I mean, is that legislation that if it were passed, it would take effect immediately and only during, I guess, or is it regular legislation that would only take effect January 1 of next year?
I believe it's regular legislation.
Okay, so it's not limited to the pandemic, to the time of the pandemic per se, unlike the urgency ordinance being considered here.
Yeah, that's what I believe that's correct. There's very limited information on this ordinance, but yeah, that's what I believe to be correct.
That it's an urgency bill. Okay, thank you.
I believe that all of the wording doesn't have to be made until later this week for bills.
Well, Madam Mayor, if it were introduced as an urgency bill, you would see that in the Legislative Council's digest as the bill.
Right, but I think it's one of those bills that just has a title.
I didn't have time to look at it before the meeting, so, okay, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Mr. Kildee?
Yeah, thank you, George. Your research shows about, if memory serves me correctly, about 68% of our total restaurants or food eating establishments do provide this service, or is it a delivery service, or is it specifically for, I guess now it's the big three?
So 68% use one of those apps. So
okay. And I'm not asking you to put you on the spot, but that seems like a real healthy number to me. Is there a countywide average, or when you did discuss it with other cities, is that our percentage somewhat typical in this, or do you have any information on that?
I have no information on that. I think we're the only city in the county to research this. So I apologize for not having that information.
No, I didn't figure you would. I thought I'd ask, but it just would appear to me that 68% is a pretty healthy number. So that's all the questions I have, Your Honor.
Are there any other questions of staff? Okay, at this time, I will ask the public for comments. If there's any member of the public who would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. I see one hand raised. Chad Harrell. Let me tell you the rules for public speaking. Each person is given 3 minutes to speak. The timer is on your screen and it will count down. We ask you to state your name and then it will start counting down. When you get to 1 minute remaining, there will be a yellow light come on, and then there'll be a red light come on when your time is up and we ask you to stop. I do enforce the 3 minute time. So, Mr. Harrell.
Good evening. My name is Chad Horrell and I'm with DoorDash. I want to start off by thanking the council for the opportunity to testify this evening. We're proud to say that restaurants on our platform are 8 times more likely to have survived the pandemic. We understand that restaurants are hurting because of the pandemic. We do not believe that commission caps are the best way to provide relief, however. There are other more palatable ways to support restaurants. It is important to keep in mind that commissions are set between us and our restaurant partners through an agreed contract. We agree to provide them the service of food delivery and in some cases additional services they have asked for, and in return, we are paid a negotiated rate. Capping this negotiated rate or setting a price control interferes with the existing contract and ultimately requires the food delivery service to provide the same level of service but at a subsidized rate. We see our service as a balance between 3 legs to a stool: restaurants, dashers, our delivery couriers, and consumers. If any one of those legs is overburdened or shortchanged, the stool cannot stand. Just yesterday, the Progressive Policy Institute released a paper that looks at price controls on third-party food delivery and highlighted this exact point, saying, quote, "The balance of fees, commissions, and prices on all 3 sides of this market is set to achieve a high volume of orders, meaning revenue for restaurants and earnings for delivery drivers. Price controls on one side of the market upsets this delicate balance. In other words, if the delivery service providers are not able to cover the costs for service due to a price control, increased customer fees will be necessary to try to recoup some of the lost revenue. This overburdens the customer, disincentivizes them to place orders, which reduces revenue for the restaurant and revenue for dashers. Point being, any kind of manipulation to the marketplace is going to create unintended consequences. We have found that each dollar that fees must be increased to offset a cap reduces volume by around 5 to 7%. That is 5 to 7% less revenue for restaurants and 5 to 7% less pay for our dashers. Specifically, citing that Progressive Policy Institute paper about what are the negative effects of price controls, their findings are, quote, higher consumer fees, longer wait times, lower quality of service, and reduced restaurant and delivery zone coverage, which was covered in the staff presentation. DoorDash has provided over $120 million in direct relief and grants to our restaurant partners since the beginning of the pandemic. In addition to our commission-based pricing model, we also offer a flat rate price. And right now we are providing free access to our storefront platform for new restaurants to DoorDash with 6 or fewer locations through June 30th. These are ways to support restaurants. Governor Newsom just announced a $2 billion in grants.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Horrell, and I apologize for mispronouncing your name. Okay, is there any other member of the public who would like to speak to us? I see no hands raised, so I will turn it back over to council members for comments. I'm going to start with Miss Santangelo because she brought this item to us.
Mayor, this is Brian. I did look up AB 286 while there was that discussion going on, and it's a title-only bill, and there is no reference to it being an urgency.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I want to start by thanking George too. Honestly, you went above and beyond what I had requested, and I appreciate that because I didn't realize how much was involved. And if anybody out there is watching, this is why we rely so much on our staff. And so thank you, and thank you to anybody else that was working on this with you, because it shed a lot more light on it than I realized was needed. So I've changed my mind. I'm concerned about this. I don't want to do anything that's going to hurt our businesses, and it just seems like there's too many unintended consequences. I don't want to make it harder for our restaurants to deliver their food. One of the things I also didn't consider was that restaurants operate under so many different models. And as George explained, you know, places that were already delivering have already baked that into their cost of food. And so, you know, those businesses had an easier time surviving when they had to switch to delivery and takeout. But beyond that, making one sweeping change like this when there are the businesses we're talking about have so many different models, it concerns me that there will be unintended consequences to them because of all of those different models. I don't know if this is a solution. It's like a one size fit all. I don't know if that's appropriate. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say. I just really, really appreciate getting all of this information and having a much better understanding of the business and what restaurants are facing. So thank you.
Okay, other council members. Mr. Mulchay.
Yeah, I'll try to be quick. No, I would not support this. It's already been said, setting a precedent and capping what a business or an industry can charge, I think that's a dangerous precedent to set. And just applying some sort of arbitrary cap, I think, does damage the ability to, you know, the free market, your capitalism to properly operate. Our public speaker kind of said it very well in laying out how this transaction works between two private businesses, and they come to an agreement, and they're free to sign that agreement if they choose. So they have alternatives. They can go to someone else and try to jockey for a better price between one of these big three or someone else. But it really comes down to freedom of choice, and they have it. I was in kind of deliberating this, I kind of drew back on, I came from part of the restaurant industry. I ran a $6.5 million full service restaurant chain in Ventura County. And in this circumstance, I would never consider in-housing delivery as a response to coronavirus, because the sheer logistics and expense for that, the overhead, is just not something I'd want to deal with. It's not a core competency of what we did. We would certainly outsource it to businesses like this. And honestly, I'd probably be begrudgingly, a little bit, but pay the fee, just like I don't like paying credit card processing fees. But you would, we can talk about that too, but they do provide a service. And when you really break it down, it's a rather expensive service to operate, even for the way they do it. It would certainly be more expensive even if you tried to in-house and take it on yourself. So as these companies scale up, they are rather big, but they still subsidize certain parts of that cost, their cost structure. So they are not recouping 100% of their costs. I don't think they're realizing a profit right now, as was referenced earlier. For people who don't like these kinds of services, and they think it is digging into restaurants, I still try to pick up where I can. My wife and I DoorDash when it's convenient, but otherwise, I like Boulevard Burger and I like Urban Cafe a lot. My wife and I frequent those two businesses a lot. We still choose we order online, or we'll call it in, or we'll just simply stop by and we'll pick it up. But otherwise, we for a lot of local businesses, we just simply skip a lot of these online delivery businesses, and we just go directly to the business ourselves. So I encourage anyone to do that. It's certainly an option, as a consumer. So there is certainly a convenience here. There's a convenience for both the consumer, there's a convenience for the business owner, and that has a cost. And I don't think that's something that we need to meddle with. Thanks.
Mr. Kildee.
Yeah, thank you. I did also support bringing this up for discussion. I commend Councilmember Santangelo for bringing this up. I have had calls about this, about the cost of it. A very thorough report. I commend staff for doing their due diligence on this. Interesting how these are all negotiated individually. And I think that we'll call it the big three now, do understand too that, they're going to have to sharpen their pencil, if they will, as well, to make sure that it's profitable for everybody. It is a service that is provided. Actually, it does help, restaurants that do partake in this. So I've learned a lot on this. This is growing in numbers. The delivery is getting larger. I've got several of my friends that use these services on a very consistent basis here. I certainly don't want to mitigate any opportunity that a restaurant will have to stay in business now. But they do have a choice. They can opt out or they can opt in for this too. And that's a business decision that they can make. So we probably haven't heard the last of it. And the last of this, there could be some legislations in the state, but my feeling now is that it does provide a service. Hopefully people will use it when they need to use it, and they'll go visit the restaurants safely, like they have been, like Mr. Mulchay said that they do, and how I would think all the rest of us have done too. But again, it's a service, I think, that you can either opt in or opt out. So my thinking now is that we just, we leave this as it is, as a business decision that a business person will have to make. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Mr. Tremblay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Again, kudos to George and the staff for the comprehensive work on this. Secondly, I really welcome the discussion, and I appreciated, Susan, you bringing this forward. I think all of us have the best intentions to help our local businesses and help our restaurants. So this is a welcome discussion. Like the rest of you, I do share the same. I have concerns about our restaurants, and the idea is superficially appealing, but I have several concerns about unintended consequences, which lead me to believe I can't support it. But just a couple, I think. First of all, I think I had the chance to speak to some restaurant owners myself, and many have opted out of these services. And the other ones I spoke to on my own informal survey, about 50-50, they had about a split of opinion about 50-50. More significantly, I think the restaurants themselves and the smaller online services are doing workarounds, which is really a function of the free market here in terms of delivering the service for less dollars. And I would rather let the free market prevail rather than have artificial price caps I'm just not supportive of price controls. The other thing I'll note is if you look at the final page of the staff report, the enforcement of this is by private right of action by a restaurant owner. I don't know about you, but in my 37 years of law practice, I don't see many, if any, restaurant owner who's going to go out and sue DoorDash or another provider in superior court to seek damages and reasonable attorney's fees. I just don't think that is going to happen. So from an enforceability standpoint, it's also kind of hollow. So I can't support this. One thing I do want to share with you in terms of my own little informal survey work, and if you forgive me, I'll just bake this silver lining into my comments, since that seems to be our expression tonight, is baking things in. But for example, anecdotally, this is not all bad news. There are commercial kitchens and who are renting to tenants who are too big to work out of their homes, but too small to have their own kitchens, and they're baking bread and they're doing cookies and so on. They are killing it. They are doing really well in their business. So if there is a silver lining, one silver lining that's related, it's that growth in that part of the industry. And I think part of that relates directly to the free market and shows how powerful the free market is. We've done an awful lot the last 12 months. I mean, we order a lot of takeout and we go pick it up directly and we tip directly, and it works really well for my wife and I. So in any event, I really appreciate the discussion, but I too would not be supportive of this ordinance. Thanks.
Mr. Kildee, I see your hand up. Did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I neglected to lower my hand, but I'll do it right now.
Okay. Well, first, I want to join everybody else in thanking George for an absolutely excellent report. This was tremendous. Thank you for all of the information. Mr. Tremblay pretty much said what I like. I have never favored governmental intervention into the free market. I've never liked price caps because they do just the opposite. And so I also think that the bill that at this late date has not had wording added to it is something that at a later date will be a gut and amend. So we need to keep an eye on that number and find out what it is they're going to change it to. Because it won't have anything to do with Grubhub or anybody else who delivers food. They'll take it and make it to something that is going to affect cities tremendously, and they'll do it at the last minute next August. So that's my comment. I am taking it that we are not going to have a motion to introduce, but I will ask, is there anyone who would like to? Then I will not ask for a reading of the title, and we will go on to the next item. The next item is B, fiscal year 2021-22 council goals and objectives. This is the third time we will have talked about these. We discussed them at length at the goals and objectives setting session. They came back at our last council meeting, staff having written them down as they thought we had directed. And then because I was concerned that a lot of these things were really requests by council members for budget items, they really didn't fit the what a goal or an objective was, with a goal or an objective being lofty things. So staff has gone through, and you know what, I'm still in finance. I need to get back here to City Council B so I can look at my comments. Staff went through and doing what they thought we had asked them to do, pulled out what appeared to be the requests for budget items. And we got that in attachment 2 in the budget, in the packet. Attachment 1 being exactly what was in our packet at the last meeting. And we have also gotten someplace here another attachment that I asked them to pull out. So everything that is in attachment 2 in blue ink was pulled out and put into attachment 3. It came to us late this morning. So I'm going to ask at this point, I don't think we need a staff report on this. It's pretty well explained. I'm going to ask if there are comments by council members on the two, attachment 2 and attachment 3, as they are in the packet. Fiscal year 21-22 council goals and objectives, attachment 2, and then budget request by city council for FY 21-22 preliminary budget review. Mr. Tremblay, yours is the first hand I see up.
Yeah, Mayor, this is Brian. Unless I missed it, did you ask if there was public comment before the council starts commenting?
No, I didn't, and I apologize. I see that there are 4 attendees. There are, I see no yellow hands, no hands up. If there's any member of the public who would like to speak to us on this item, please raise your hand now. I see no hands up, so I will now go in the order that council members raise their hand. Mr. Tremblay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And thank you to staff for working hard on this item. I think for those who may be watching, typically every year the council has gathered in the library in a special meeting and has spent several hours going through these goals and objectives in a great level of detail and making sure that the language was or is what the 5 of us can agree to. And in my opinion, this meeting that we have in early February is arguably one of our most important meetings of the year, because we really set the roadmap and the agenda for city staff to follow during the following fiscal year. The challenges this time around is we tried to do this all on Zoom and it's really difficult. It made it difficult on us, and I think it made it difficult on staff. And so I really appreciate staff's efforts on attachment 2. That said, I really struggled with attachment 2 for 2 primary reasons. One is that, in my view, whatever objectives or programs or projects that individual council members brought out and we all agreed on, however we label them, to me, they were very important to all 5 of us. And I think whether you call them objectives or you call them budget requests, we should be transparent about it, and we should publish them, whether we call them goals and objectives or we call them budget requests. So I really support the idea of attachment 3, that we could publish at this, that's how it strikes me, we could publish this at the same time as we are publishing the goals and objectives. So regardless of what we call it, we're transparently saying this is what our roadmap is for the next fiscal year, whether it's an objective or a budget request. So I really like the idea of attachment 3. I didn't like the idea of attachment 2 because when I read it, a lot of stuff was just put by the wayside. The second big comment that I have is, though, there are a lot of things that are in attachment 3 that I think are objectives. They're not really budget requests per se. And, you know, for example, I can see, you know, for example, on attachment 3, receiving further information on cannabis R&D and testing business activities, that to me is an objective. It's not a project request that becomes part of the budget process. Number 2, you know, I know this is mine. I asked for consideration of adding an additional sheriff service technician report writer. That's definitely a budget request. No issue there. But number 3, on evaluating the feasibility of increasing the current police department funding to expand the city's involvement and collaboration with the sheriff's department and behavioral health and helping law enforcement respond to homelessness and calls involving mental health issues. In other words, as I made clear the other night, not increasing the sheriff's department budget to do that. That to me is not really a budget request. It's more of an objective. So is the objective of exploring an ordinance requiring local pharmacies to post signage concerning the safe local disposal of unused medicines. So to wrap this up, where I come out on this is, I take issue with the way, with what we are labeling some of the things in attachment 3. I'm okay with the way that attachment 2 has been rewritten in terms of the objectives. I think it's important that we publish both, you know, at the same time, simultaneously, but I'm also happy to talk about things if we want to take them from attachment 3 and put them back into the objectives. I think that would be a good conversation to have. And I know we're kind of getting, I hope we don't get too wrapped around the axle on what's an objective versus what's a project for purposes of budget requests. But anyway, that seems to be where we are. And that's the hard part about doing this on Zoom, because we're not all in the same room grinding out the language. So with that, I'll yield back, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
And let me just say, so everybody will remember, the one place where these would be published would be in the at the beginning of the budget. There's a city manager transmittal letter at the very beginning of our budget, and those goals are early on in that letter, and then he speaks to other things. So Mr. Tremblay is asking that this attachment 3, called budget request by City Council for FY 21-22, would be published at the same time in the same place. Is that correct, Mr. Tremblay?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I would request that as part of the council goals and objectives, for example, that are put on the website, that this is also published at the very same time.
Okay.
So it's very public and very transparent, and it can be published later in the budget, but it ought to be published right now with our goals and objectives.
Well, these are not to start until next budget year.
I understand that. I just think that from a transparency standpoint, we ought to have whatever we call them, you know, in this attachment 3, they ought to be right next to the council goals and objectives in terms of being published.
For the same year?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, next hand is Councilmember Santangelo.
I really appreciated staff's work in attachment 2. I tend to agree that some of the things in attachment 3 aren't really, it don't seem like budget requests. So, and that also kind of is what I like about attachment 2 is that we had the objectives, and then it seemed like we had more specific requests related to the objectives. I just don't know if I would call them, I don't know what they have to, they don't all have to do with the budget. I also had a few comments about one of the, oh, I know, I don't see that they have omitted anything, and maybe I misunderstood you, Mr. Tremblay.
Ms. Santangelo,
Was omitted.
you're breaking up.
Oh,
We didn't hear what you said.
how am I now?
You're now.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. Mr. Tremblay, maybe I misunderstood you, but it sounded like you were concerned that there were some things in attachment 1 that were omitted from attachment 2. And I didn't find that. I know things were sort of rearranged and put in different places, but I didn't see anything that was omitted. Maybe I misunderstood what you were saying though. And I did have a comment about one of our objectives that now that I'm reading it this far down the road, I have some concerns about. So is it okay if I? I'm sorry. So under community enrichment, so now it would be the second bullet under projects. So this is the one, evaluate the feasibility of increasing the current policy funding to expand the city's involvement in collaboration with VC Sheriff, VC Behavioral Health, and other agencies for assistance as appropriate in helping law enforcement respond to homelessness and calls involving mental health issues. I have no problem with that, except that I think it's too narrow. I think that if the goal is to look at how to better serve people that are experiencing homelessness or mental health issues, this means that the only thing that we can evaluate is increasing funding for law enforcement to do that. And I think we should be open to other ways to do that. So I don't like how it sort of pigeonholes us into only being able to evaluate potential programs or services. And I have no idea what's up on the horizon or what could be born out of, the attempts of people in the community trying to help our homeless and mental health crises. It just seems to me that a better strategy would be evaluate funds for any appropriate means to respond to homelessness or mental health issues.
Okay, now you're talking about C.
No, I was
Because that
talking
was
about
all struck out in red, and it was moved up 1. And the words that were added were and mental health issues under B.
But it was moved down on big page 8 to the second bullet under projects.
Okay. Okay, so Mr. Tremblay has his hand up.
Yeah, I have, thanks, Madam Mayor. I have 2 responses to that. First of all, as I read attachment 2, item 2B was changed to add in mental health, which I think responds to Councilmember Santangelo's question. Item C, which is the one that I had asked for, which is the evaluating the feasibility of increasing the current police department funding, that was deleted from the objective and put under this in attachment 2 under this projects requested by for the budget, which I think it's a goal and objective. I don't think it's a budget item. But my response is that is not too narrow, because where the issues have come up that I've heard about relative to mental health issues have been specifically with regard to seeing if we can find a way to assist law enforcement in responding to circumstances that do involve individuals who have mental health issues. That's where a lot of the conversation last year came up in terms of finding a way when it is appropriate to have law enforcement receive the assistance of mental health professionals in responding to those calls. So I very deliberately, when we drafted this language, or when I suggested this language during our early, our early February goals and objectives meeting, I deliberately made it this narrow, because that to me is where the issue is. The broader, how I would respond, Susan, is the broader issue that you're talking about. I have two responses. One is that I think that's already covered under item 2B, under the developing and implementing appropriate education, enforcement, and assistance strategies to address homeless and mental health issues, which I have no problem with. But I would have a problem. So for example, I would have a problem with the city going out and independently hiring social workers to deal with mental health issues, because that's a County of Ventura service. That's a county service. It's not a municipal service. Where it has come up for us again is in the law enforcement context. And if I might, just Madam Mayor, you know, in attachment 3, I can support making these all budget requests. Although I think, frankly, out of these 9 items on attachment 3, there's only one item that's a true budget item. And that's number 2, which is the Sheriff's Service Technician item. All the rest of them, number 1 and then items 3 through 9, in my opinion, ought to go back into the goals and objectives. They ought to go back into attachment 2. But that's, you know, those are my feelings. So thanks for letting me respond.
Can I respond to that?
Certainly.
So let's say the county developed a mental health response team. Would we consider contracting with them? Why do we send law enforcement to mental health issues if there's no crime or violence? When somebody is physically injured, we send paramedics. When there's a fire, we send the fire department. Why are we sending law enforcement to people who are homeless or who are having mental illness that doesn't involve crime or violence? There are plenty of those happening, and there are plenty of opportunities to get services to people that are more appropriate than law enforcement, and leave law enforcement to what they do well so that they can protect us and maintain public safety. Mentally ill people are more likely the victims of crime than committing crime.
But the calls go through the sheriff's department.
But why? Let's think outside the box. There are programs in other cities that have 911 responding and triaging and allowing other services to respond to certain calls. I'm not saying that's happening. I'm not, but I'm saying I don't understand why we wouldn't be open to something like that. And
Cities
they're very—
in Ventura County?
Excuse me?
Cities in Ventura County?
No, I'm just saying that there are models out there. It's not unheard of. It's not, they're trying to get the correct services and the correct resources to what people need. And I don't see why we would be not looking at all opportunities and thinking outside the box.
Mr. Tremblay.
Well, Madam Mayor, my response to Councilmember Santangelo is that the instances that we've talked about over the course of the last year in particular have been ones involving law enforcement and law enforcement response to circumstances where there is a mental health issue that may present itself. So the question is, are there some circumstances in which it's appropriate to explore a way to provide additional assistance to law enforcement in responding when those circumstances arise? I'm not opposed to, and that's why I made it very narrowly tailored to be responsive to the concerns that had been expressed in the community on law enforcement responding in these circumstances. We all know we have an outstanding program right now through Senior Deputy Chris Dyer in terms of our response to the homelessness, to homeless individuals. And that's truly a model program. And I think we should have the ability to hopefully perhaps be able to build on that program based on the language of the objective. But this has been in a law enforcement context. What you're advocating for is really what's already contained in the language that staff changed in Objective 2B. And we can look at that when the time is appropriate. And if you look at the objectives under 2B, under Attachment 2 that staff has rewritten for us, that's where your comments come up.
Well, first of all, I think they're different because the objective that's now the bullet is specifically saying evaluate the feasibility of increasing the funding, and that's not at all what 2B says. So I think they're different.
Oh, I agree with you. I think they're absolutely different, but mine was more narrowly tailored on the law enforcement side.
Right. And I'm gonna, if I could finish, with all due respect, the concern from many people in the community are that law enforcement shouldn't be responding to many of these calls at all. Not that we should send law enforcement plus. Yes, sometimes that's totally appropriate, absolutely, but not all the time. And so what I'm talking about is as a way to urgently respond to people who call for help that don't need law enforcement. And there are programs across the country that are doing this successfully. So I just don't want to see us pigeonholed into saying the only way that we would look at increasing funding to help the mentally ill or homeless would be to do it through increasing funding to law enforcement.
We've had a lot of this dialogue between the two of you. I'm going to open it up. Mr. Mulchay, are you wanting to speak on this item or on another one of the objectives?
I want to speak on this item. I have plenty
Okay,
of others.
let's finish this item before we go on to other items is all I'm asking.
Okay. So I hear what Mr. Tremblay is saying. I hear what Ms. Santangelo is saying. I actually agree with both of you, but Susan, with what you're suggesting, in how I'm reading in the blue on big page 8, under the projects requested, on attachment 2, big page 8, I read it and tell me if maybe I'll start another discussion. But I see that technically that could be achieved under the way this has been written. And just in that, and hear me out, just in that, on the other thing we were talking about, the additional sheriff's service technician, the report writer, that's not a armed and badged individual. Unless I'm wrong, that person is someone who's dispatched out to respond to calls to the police, but where a perpetrator is no longer in the vicinity and a report simply needs to be taken. I don't see how, in the way this is written, I don't see how, I could see how we could consider what you're suggesting in this language. That's how I'm reading it. Evaluate the feasibility of increasing the current policy funding to expand the city's involvement and collaboration with, 1, the BC Sheriff's Department.
Let's just talk here. There's a typo. If you go up to the red one, it's police funding.
Right.
Somebody mistyped it into policy funding. So it's police funding. That's what we agreed. That's what we talked about February 3rd in our last meeting.
That changes everything now.
Is that correct, Mr.
Okay.
Tremblay?
Yes, Madam Mayor, it's police funding, not policy funding. It was a typo in attachment 2. And I would like to be called again when you deem it appropriate.
Okay, but Mr. Mulchay has the floor. I just wanted to make sure everybody understood there was a a typo there and everybody was reading the typo.
Okay, I like policy funding personally, but
Well, what we agreed to have come back was police funding.
I'll let you guys continue to talk. I'll have a question about a follow-up question on this.
You have a question now or later?
Later.
Okay. Mr. Kildee?
All right, well, there's a lot to unpack here, isn't there? Well, with respect to this, I can understand both council members' concerns with this. I will say that I think it has to go through one agency, and that agency right now is the sheriff's department. If nothing more, a liability issue with the city would have to incur here. Obviously, if there's behavioral health and some issues that behavioral health can satisfy, of course, I'd be willing to look into that. But I do think that they're going to need some backup so they make sure that they don't get into situations that can be detrimental for them as well. I think we always have to look into the liability of this as well. But I think how it's written gives us enough flexibility to look into this whole situation here. I would be very reluctant not to have it go through the sheriff's department right now, because that is the agency that does provide that service at this point. Now, it's subject to change if we can come up with some new paradigms and some new ideas, and financially and fiscally we'll work with this. The sheriff department is very upfront about new ideas here. I mean, they certainly implemented the Project Hope. So any new situations, I know that I feel very strongly they'd be interested in looking at this. But the way this is written, at least in attachment 2, I think that does give us the flexibility in the future to look into this further if it needs to be. So I can go on, but those are my comments on this particular item. Maybe we need to finish this one first before we go on to something else.
Well, I think we do. And I know our policy says that the mayor speaks last, but we've been talking about this for half an hour and I'd like to get a few words in. I agree with Mr. Tremblay on the issue of having whatever we're going to have go through the police contract. We have a social worker currently that works with the police. I think if we're going to have a mental health person, it would be in the same vein and as needed there. And that's with, I'm speaking with respect to whether it's through the police contract or some other contract. I don't see us at this point with the rest of the county not doing the same thing, going off on our own to offer mental health services. The county does offer mental health services. I think once we decide on this, we can then have the discussion of whether we're going to keep it as a budget request or if we're going to put it up as an objective under the goal. So those are mine. Mr. Mulchey's hand was up next, it looks like.
Yeah, I am actually comfortable with the language, only that, as I understand the police and speaking with our commander a while back, and they seemed open to exploring different ways to addressing mental health issues, not only within Camarillo, but I mean throughout all their jurisdictions. Any kind of as that change potentially happens, it's gonna happen under the police, with the police department, and whether they try to in-house that or they contract out to like VC Behavioral Health, which they certainly have the ability to do, and which they may choose in part to do. You know, I know that any kind of transition is going to happen really carefully and diligently. So I'm comfortable with language.
Mr. Tremblay's hand's up next. And as you start speaking, if people would then take their hand down, I'll keep on knowing whose hand comes up next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. No, I would like to keep the language on evaluating the feasibility of increasing the current police department funding as it is. My only thought was that I don't know whether it's frankly, I would put it as a goal and objective, because it's sort of exploring what our possibilities are as opposed to a budget request. But I think it's immaterial to me which one we call it, as long as we publish both the attachment 3, whatever we call these budget requests, together with the goals and objectives at the same time. I am okay.
Okay, you said a goal and objective. We have goals of fiscal management, community enrichment, and it had been placed originally as an objective under community enrichment. So are you suggesting it stay there or go off on it as its own goal?
If I were rewriting this, Madam Mayor, before we got into this discussion, which a lot of this is kind of semantical, but I would just make it an objective as opposed to a budget request. But I'm okay either way, as long as whatever we leave in attachment 3 is published together with our goals and objectives document. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Santangelo.
So I'm just gonna leave with a few questions, some food for thought. Project Hope is amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Does it require a law enforcement officer? When somebody is physically injured and they dial 911, they get an ambulance. They don't get law enforcement unless there's reason to send law enforcement with them. I've ridden along with ambulances. Yes, I have. Many. For many years, I worked in the field. I taught paramedics, and I went on many medical calls, and there wasn't law enforcement unless they were needed. There's no reason that we shouldn't be doing the same thing with mental health. So my point was that we ought to be open, and I readily admitted that I didn't know what it looked like. Obviously a program that came in to help respond to things like this would have to work with the sheriff, obviously. But I don't know if the sheriff should be administering a program to get mental health aid to people. So.
Okay, I heard 4 members of the council say they could support the way it is written as the second bullet under projects requested by city council under community enrichment. That's on big page 8. So I guess the question is, do we leave it under a project or do we put it back up as C under objectives? Mr. Kildee had his hand up first.
I'd like to see it as an objective.
Okay. I don't think I even have to ask Mr. Tremblay. I know he'd like it as an objective. He said so.
Yes.
I agree with that too, but Mr. Moshe?
I was actually thinking it was more of a budget item. The way, in my head, I know we'll have a broader discussion about all the items and what bucket they fall into, but things that we can simply do in-house. And I know we say the word explore quite a bit in a lot of our objectives. Although I think there can be, I don't see why we have to spend a whole year exploring it and then wait a whole another year until we implement it. I think there are some of these that we can both explore and potentially choose to implement within the same fiscal year.
Okay, the question is right now, not philosophically where they belong, but where does this one belong?
Oh, I honestly think it is I think it is a budgetary item because I think we may choose to implement it within a year.
Santangelo,
It's budgetary. It's increasing funding.
okay, so I heard 3 people say, put it up under objective. Raise your hand if that's what you want, just to reaffirm. Mr. Tremblay is not, oh, he's raising that hand. Okay.
Madam Mayor, I think regardless of where we put it, staff is going to look at this in the context of the next fiscal year budget. So I don't know that it's really material whether we have it as a, and I see Mr. Ramirez is now signing in, and he may have an opinion, and I would welcome that. I'm not sure where this goes, but in any event, perhaps he could educate us on where it ought to go.
I think from staff standpoint, that's exactly the clarity that we need. Do we include this in our initial budget analysis and incorporating an appropriation for this item or not? As an objective, I see it as something, as Vice Mayor Moshe mentioned, is it something we're going to explore throughout the year. And if something, we'll keep our eyes and ears open. If something comes available to possibly increase an appropriation, then we would do it, say, at mid-year. If it's a budgetary item, it's something we're going to initially consider as part of next year's budget and very possibly identify an appropriation. If it's an objective, it's more broad, and that's not the case. We would not necessarily budget for it, nor would we necessarily identify specific staff time for it. But as staff time became available, we would then address it.
Okay, Mr. Tremblay, it's your call. We've spent a lot of time on this one.
I'm fine to keep it as an objective, knowing that city staff is going to spend some time in the next fiscal year looking at this.
Okay, that was 3 for objective. So I think that one is going to stay as an objective. I know that there are others that other people want to talk about. It is now 20 to 7. We've been sitting here since 4:30. We will come back at 7 o'clock for a different public meeting. And I'm going to call a break now. We will take the rest of these up after all the rest of the business is finished this evening. So right now we will recess until 7 o'clock. We're now in the longest minute. It is 7 o'clock. I'll call the meeting back to order. And I don't see Councilmember Tremblay. That doesn't mean he's not here. There he is.
I'm here, Madam Mayor.
Okay, I just, on the screen, I couldn't see you. Ask the record to reflect that all council members are present. This is the time for public comments on items that are on or are not on the agenda tonight. I do not see any hands raised. If there's any member of the public who would like to speak to us on an item that is on or not on the agenda, please raise your hand. I see no hands being raised. So we will go on to the business we were discussing before we took our break, which was council goals and objectives. And we, I believe, have, I'm going to start, what we did before was start with one that had interest, but I would like to go through goal by goal and take them in order so that we don't miss something. So the first goal is fiscal management. Was there anything there that, is everybody okay with that?
Are we following attachment 1 or attachment 2?
Well, the goals are all in the same order on both attachment 1 and 2. Attachment 3 is a list of budget requests. So attachment 2 had some rewording of number 2 objective under fiscal management. And it had a mild rewording of number 5. Okay, I don't see anybody saying they have any problem with either one of those. And then something was moved from another one. Let's talk about it when we get to the other one, okay? Community enrichment. We've talked about B, 2B, and we've talked about 2C. And then there is D, and there was some rewording on D.
I'm good with the way it was submitted.
Pardon? I'm sorry, I didn't.
I'm good with the way that it was submitted.
Okay. And let's take the attachment C separately. So then we get down to California State University Channel Islands. Nothing was changed from last year. Is everybody okay with that? Land use and transportation. There was rewording of number 4. And it looks like part of the previous number 4 was moved down into what would be number 5, but it was moved to the budget request, and that became what number? Somebody help me here.
It's not on the item number 5 under environmental resource management. That was originally under land use and transportation. I did not see it appear on attachment 3 that specifically laid out budget.
Okay,
It's,
you're right, but it was moved down to the next one, environmental and resource management, instead of land use and transportation. So can we talk about it when we talk about that next?
Sure.
Okay. Anybody have any, well, they were combined, okay. The next goal is environmental and resource management. And here there were some changes. So would you like to talk about that now? Mr. Malche, I think you had your hand up to talk about this one.
Yeah, for item number 5, only to the extent which I want to talk about item number 5 in the context of whether it is a objective or whether we consider it for budgetary.
Okay.
I think it belongs in the budget.
You have the floor.
I simply, I think it belongs in budget.
Because it belongs as a budget request.
I think it belongs in the budget request only because I think evaluating the transition is going to require resources, although I'm confident that a vast majority of that could be procured and paid for through federal funds, through the Department of Transportation, or I'm sorry, the FTA. But I think we need to look at it within that context of what kind of resources we may need to put on it.
Okay. Any other comments?
I'll make a comment. I don't know. I'm kind of thinking that we evaluate this because it's hard to budget for something that we don't know the cost yet. But if we keep evaluating it and we see that it's economically and environmental feasible to go forward with like a electric or a hybrid, then we can budget it. So I'm thinking now that we might want to keep it as an evaluation.
If I may.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this kind of goes back to more the philosophy of whether things are an objective or they belong in a budget. I kind of approach some of these items the same way we would approach like CIP, where in-house we develop kind of a rough estimate as to what something may cost, and we kind of plug that in. And then during this process, we will find out what that true cost is and how it'll be paid for. In this instance, it'll cost money, but I think a significant portion can come through FTA funds. But I think having some sort of placeholder there, just like we do in CIP, is important for the things we deem to be a priority for this next fiscal year.
So we could look at a desalter for 35 million and then it turns out it's 70.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that'll, I don't think this will be like that, but just from an evaluation standpoint, the costs of just simply evaluating, not the cost of implementing anything.
Anybody else have any feelings? Mr. Tremblay.
You know, Madam Mayor, I mean, I support number 5. And again, I support it. I don't know whether it's an frankly, in some ways it's immaterial whether it's an objective or a budget request. I'm mindful of what Mr. Ramirez told us, which is, I guess, the distinction between the two that's been drawn is that if it's a budget request, it's going to go immediately into preliminary budget preparation for the next fiscal year, as opposed to being an objective, which will be worked on during the next fiscal year, but it will be really reviewed as to policy, which is why on the one we discussed before the break, where I really thought from a policy standpoint it was appropriate that it be an objective. I'm willing to defer to whatever Councilmember Malche says on this. I have a feeling that we're heading for a territory where we're going to call some things objectives and other things budget requests, and it's not going to be consistent in terms of application.
Well, the one thing to remember is if they find out along the way that there are funds available right now, they will work on it. We've done that with other things. We had an objective someplace, I can't tell you where, it's still there, to work on recycled water. As soon as they found grants for recycled water reservoirs, they applied and we moved on it, although it's still an objective.
Madam Mayor, if I could,
Yes.
this is a perfect example, I think, of where the distinguishing between an objective and a budget item is really important. This objective, for an example, kind of sets the playing field from an environmental standpoint as our fleet's related. So every single year, we evaluate our fleet and replacement of fleet vehicles. But also during the year, obviously, as we know, our automobiles stop running as well, and we need to replace them mid-year. This is an objective, basically sets the direction for us in the future when we're going to replace those fleet vehicles to consider, alternative vehicles to purchase on a day-to-day basis. So I think this is a good example of an objective that basically just establishes the playing field moving forward when we evaluate our fleet, if that makes sense. But it also allows us the flexibility to look at different types of technology. So it's not just electric, but it's maybe hybrid. A lot of our specialty vehicles like tractors and our large trucks, they just don't make electric vehicles in those form right now. So we try to keep our, but natural gas may be the best option there for now. Anyway, I hope that makes sense. I think this is a good objective.
Are you okay with that, Mr. Moshe?
Yeah, by its very nature, any objective we pursue and or work to achieve is going to take resources, and those resources take money. So by its very nature, everything here is going to have some sort of cost. It's going to bear some sort of cost. I'm fine with that. What I'm hoping not to do is get into this kind of arbitrary thinking that things only can happen in 1 year blocks at a time, that we can only think of something in a year and wait for a whole nother year to implement something or take any kind of action.
Try to think of it this way. If you want it to happen in the next 12 months, it needs to go in as a budget request. If you think it's going to take longer than that, then it's an objective. And I think transitioning our fleet will take longer than that.
Oh no, transitioning our fleet will certainly take longer. Transitioning the fleet will take 10 plus years. Now this is the means by which we need to figure out how such a transition occurs and how we accommodate that from an infrastructure standpoint too, because as you transition to new energy, whether it's natural gas or electric, there are certain infrastructure requirements necessary, things we have to consider. That's why I talk about FTA, because FTA has specific grants for researching and doing studies on how your city would transition, at least its public transportation to alternative fuel.
So that's a good example of an objective. It's a long-term thing.
The transition is a long-term thing. Trying to lay the groundwork and the timeline and the planning is more of a short-term thing.
Right.
Yeah, but I'm fine. I think having an objective is fine enough.
Okay. Hey, it's in there.
It's in there. Progress.
Okay, next is community development. Nothing changed. We all agreed to those. Next is economic development. And here under economic development, the number 3, receive further information on cannabis R&D and testing business activities, was removed from that, and it was put into the budget request list. Because that would happen probably just next year. We'd get that information. Mr. Moshe.
Yeah, so here I'm on the opposite side of the coin, and I'm probably in agreement with Mr. Tremblay. Why would we need that in the budget? Right, we're just receiving information. That's the objective.
I think staff put that in as a budget item because it's in all likelihood, we don't have the expertise in the cannabis industry. So we're going to need to look to outside source and pay somebody, in essence, some experts to kind of help us better understand it. So from a budgetary standpoint, we anticipate an appropriation of some type of line item for a potential consultant that specializes in this industry. That's our thought process on that one.
Okay, Mr. Tremblay had his hand up next.
Well, then by the same logic, you would, under attachment 3, number 5, exploring the feasibility of an ordinance requiring local pharmacies to post signage concerning the safe local disposal of unused medicines. It's the one I suggested at our earlier meeting. Why would that be a budget request? I mean, it doesn't make sense that it's a budget request. And Madam Mayor, I respectfully disagree with you. There's no, this is sort of like tomato versus tomato. There is no budget request. We don't have, if you say anything that's an objective, we're going to spend money. What Mr. Ramirez said earlier was, look, we're going to, I guess the distinction you're drawing, Mr. Ramirez, is if you're going to spend money on it and put it in the preliminary budget for the next fiscal year versus evaluating it during the course of the next fiscal year and coming back to us potentially with a mid-year budget revision. That's how I think of it. Is that the correct? So my question is that the correct way to think of it?
Yes.
I think so. And to some degree, I think we have to obviously, it's not just a budgetary item from an appropriation standpoint, but it's also our work plan. And so I look at that ordinance as something that if we're gonna work on that and simply stop at the point in which we bring back information to you, then yes, that's a little bit different than, are we going to start that ball rolling down the hill and then ultimately end up with an ordinance? I mean, do you expect an ordinance to come back? And then we have to pay the city attorney's office will then prepare an ordinance, all those type of things. So it's it's preparing an ordinance in essence. I mean, now if you want to give us direction now to say, no, stop, just bring us back some basic information and that's it, that's fine. But in my experience, once you start that ball rolling, we in essence would bring an ordinance back to you. And then there's the public information aspect of it, and rolling that out to the different pharmacies if that happens. So from that standpoint, it's a very specific kind of job we're going to do on it. And we would plan to look at that from a budgetary standpoint. I mean, from the outset.
Okay, so we're still back on cannabis R&D testing and business activities. Is that right? Is that what your hand's up for, Mr. Moshe?
Yes and no. It's something that we.
Or were you talking about this in general, or?
Now I'm talking about it. Now I'm talking about it in general.
Okay.
Again, I want to go 30,000 feet and have a more philosophical discussion. So if receiving information, which I understand that we don't have expertise in-house, and we may have to go out to get more information about R&D testing and business activities, and it may involve an ordinance. Do we have in-house capabilities and or expertise when it comes to the transition of our public transportation to alternative energy? So wouldn't we have to go outside for that too? And so thus, wouldn't that be a budgetary expense? I'm having a hard time understanding how some of these fit and some don't. And I share Mr. Tremblay's frustration that we're going like, yeah, tomato.
Yeah, I mean, from staff standpoint, we're kind of caught in the middle on that one. I couldn't tell you right now if we have the expertise on staff. I imagine we do, but expertise in electric vehicles and those different types of things.
Infrastructure.
Kind of fundamental research on just different opportunities or different replacement vehicles. Yeah, I think we in-house could handle that specific issue, if that answers your question. So
I keep feeling that there's somewhat of a disconnect on item number 5. I'm going backwards now. Under environment resource management on number 5 in the transition of the public transit to clean energy. That I'm suggesting that we transition. We have incur cost to transition. That's not what that is. That's not what that says. It says evaluate. I'm more or less asking for a study and a plan for how the city would go about a transition to clean energy. So
Isn't that what it says?
that's what I'm saying. It says, so by its very nature, I'm saying, would that be just like receive information on cannabis R&D and testing? You're receiving, you know, we have to hire someone to look into that further and do research. I'm assuming that we'd probably have to hire someone and do research about transition vehicle fleet to clean energy and the infrastructure necessary to support such a transition.
Yeah, I think that's possible, but the simple fact of directing us to begin to look at that over a longer period of time and a longer horizon, isn't so specific. We don't really know who we need to hire on that one yet. But it's a broader kind of umbrella approach. And I think that's why that would be considered more of an objective.
Mrs. Santangelo.
Does it, maybe I'm just naive, does it require a consultant and a study to say that as we replace our vehicles, we're going to try to replace them with cleaner energy vehicles?
It doesn't.
So I see it as, I mean, we already have budgetary or line items for the replacement of vehicles, right? So this would just be embedded in that.
Correct. That's the way we look at it.
As an objective.
I'm not going to argue it. I think it's far more complex than that. I mean, having an electric vehicle and looking, even converting some of my fleet at the business to electric, it's the infrastructure necessary to support such a transition is a little bit more substantial. So, and that's, again, I go back to that. That's why the FTA has a whole grant process specifically for public transit agencies who want to research this.
Well, this doesn't say they can't go and apply for an FTA grant. It doesn't say that at all.
That's fine. No, that's just fine. I'm just having a hard time threading the needle as to what is and what is not considered a budget. I just keep going back and forth about this, so. But okay. I'm not gonna flog this horse anymore, so.
So that will stay as an objective. I just want to see if there are 3 hands for that to stay as an objective. 3. Okay. Now we're going to go back and talk about economic development, where we as a council had received further information on cannabis R&D testing and business activities. That was removed from the objective list and transferred to the budget request list. And I know there's a 30,000-foot discussion of what goes where. Does anybody have a problem with this being here?
So, Your Honor, we're going to move that to attachment 3 and then have that discussion at that point.
It's also, it's been moved to a project under fiscal management now.
But it was removed from the whole thing and it's now on the project list as number 1 on attachment 3.
Right, but it's also, if you go back to big page 7, it's listed as a project under fiscal management as one of the diversification of city revenues.
Right, so it's considered something under finance, fiscal management, but it will not be listed there. The only time these things are going to be listed is on attachment 3. Okay, I don't hear any objection to that, so I'm going to move on. Community relations, number 3, there was some rewording of that. Number 4, the explanation was removed. It says that that really, it says that was completed It was outlined in our communication strategy that was presented to the city council just about a year ago, and we approved that. So we already have that in our communication strategy. Susan.
Yeah, that was mine. I think my intent was that we actually hold them. So.
Oh, I hope you're not meeting by Zoom. So
No. That's why it said when safe to do so.
okay. Well, I think then the thing to do would be to, when we get back to in-person meetings, ask that we start doing that, because it's already been explored. It's been approved by the city council, and
okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Okay. And so the next one was reworded, number 5. Sean, this was yours. It was moved to a budget request.
Yeah, which I'm fine.
You're fine with that? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that gets us through the objectives. Now, is there any particular one of these? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Mr. Tremblay.
Okay, so let me inquire of staff, because I really struggled with this attachment 2. And I understand full well that the need for attachment 3, but is the way that attachment 2 is laid out, is it staff's objective, Mr. Ramirez, that for example, in fiscal management, you'd have a series of objectives, and then on the same goals and objectives, you would include in the budget or the requests by the city council for preliminary budget review in that same document under attachment 2? I really need some clarity here. Attachment 2 to me is very, with all due respect, very confusing. It looked to me like attachment 2, those things were not going to be included in the goals and objectives document. They were going to be listed, I guess, under these goals, but as separate budget requests. If that's the intent of staff, I didn't think it was. I thought the intent of staff was to remove them from the goals and objectives list.
That is, staff does not have any intent here. We simply pulled what were perceived to be, interpreted to be projects and programs out of the objectives, and to list them separately so that the council could proceed with however you so chose on those. And so everything in blue, well, not everything in blue. I apologize. I think the seek opportunities and community engagement as outlined is just mentioned. I believe that's still an objective, correct? I mean, that.
Can I reframe it, Madam Mayor? Can I continue?
Certainly.
Mr. Mayor.
No, not Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Ramirez.
Yes.
When I read attachment 2, should I take everything that is in this blue line, projects requested by City Council for 21-22 budget? Do I assume that everything in there goes out of the goals and objectives? I mean, unless we otherwise change it. Is that what the intent of this document was?
The intent of the intent of the document was simply to try to bifurcate between what's an objective and what's a project or a goal. And then so that it's clear for us when we begin our budget process that we're accurately reflecting what the council's wishes are is to include in the budget. Kind of,
Mr. Ramirez, I think what he's asking is this. In your transmittal letter and on the website and wherever else we put our goals and objectives for next year, next budget year, will the list of goals and objectives include the blue that says budget requested by City Council for 21-22 budget?
Yes, if it makes it through yes, if that's the idea. If it makes it through the budget process, yes.
So you'd leave it there. You wouldn't pull it off into a separate attachment that would follow.
Well, if the council prefers to pull these off of the goals and objectives list and put them in a separate document, staff will do whatever the preference is of the council.
Okay, I'm going to stay with Tony because he had the floor, and then I'll go to Susan.
Mr. Ramirez, I think that my initial confusion, because I didn't know how to read attachment 2. I didn't know if you were putting a separate category in attachment 2 for projects that you meant as budget requests for the budget, or if you were just going to simply eliminate that blue line language from attachment 2. I've been proceeding on the basis that you were going to eliminate all that blue line language from attachment 2.
Well, and I think by providing the attachment 3, I think that's the intent. I mean, that was the purpose of creating that attachment 3.
Okay, yes. So then Madam Mayor, okay, so then what I asked for before was that when the goals and objectives are finally published, however we arrive at them tonight, that at the same time we publish those, we also publish this attachment 3 as budget requests concurrently with, at the same time, simultaneously with the goals and objectives. Would that be what we would do here? At least certainly that's what I would advocate from a transparency standpoint.
That is the current proposal, yes.
Okay, thanks, Madam Mayor.
Ms. Santangelo.
I have no problem with a separate list, but I also like the fact that the projects are listed under the specific goal, because I think it gives some context as to why we decided to fund it, to put it on the budget, and to show how it aligns with our goals.
Mr. Tremblay.
Madam Mayor, I fully agree with Councilmember Santangelo. I have no difficulty in putting everything into one document, one kitchen sink, as it were, regardless of whether we call it an objective or a budget request for preliminary budget review. Part of my confusion, and I apologize, is just, frankly, was the way attachment 2 was presented. And no criticism. I think this is just difficult because we're sitting here talking about tomato versus tomato.
Okay, but let me just ask you this, because you've said several times you were very, very confused by attachment 2.
I was.
So do you think that a member of the public reading this, as it were, without any of the red line, but with all the blue and the black, do you think a member of the public would be as confused as you were? Because you've got a whole lot more information than a member of the public would.
Well, I don't know. All I know is that when I read this, I was confused as to what staff's intention was on attachment 2. And we could have gone in 2 different directions. What Susan said makes some sense to me logically, even though it's a goals and objectives document. You then put within, so for example, within the fiscal management goal, you have a list of objectives. And at the very end of that, there is a request for preliminary budget review as to the receipt of further information on cannabis R&D and testing facilities. That's not illogical. And it combines everything into one document. But all I know is whether we put them in attachment 2 or we keep it in attachment 3, we publish all of it at the same time.
Okay, I'd like to hear some other. Mr. Kildee.
Okay, well, we've had a long discussion, haven't we? Okay, so I think it needs to be one document and everything needs to be in one document. I think it's confusing when you have attachment 2, attachment 3. Let's make it one document. So at least when JQ Public reads this, he has one, or she has one document that she could read. And I'm fine with talking about the budgeted request. Let's put it in the one document. I like the format. what we've been doing here in attachment 2, attachment 2, and we can add the attachment 3 into one document, which would be 2. So that's,
It's already there as attachment 2.
I agree, but let's not do more than one. Let's put everything, when we bring this out to the public, let's just have them have one document that they can read.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. It's already there, called attachment 2, if you take away the red ink.
Right. So let's, my feelings are we stick with that.
Okay? I'm fine with that. How about you, Sean?
Yeah, one document, attachment 2, consolidated, holistic.
Okay, I think staff has direction.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I hate to ask this at this time, but this is a question for you and maybe for Mr. Pirrick. At this time, would it be appropriate to discuss the addition of any other objectives or budget requests? Because I have an additional one that just came to my attention this week, but I don't know whether or not we can do that under this agenda item. If we can't, then I'll just put it under council comments.
I think that's a Mr. Pirrick question.
I agree.
Yeah, I'm looking at what the agenda on this says. I think we can do that. It says review and discuss the draft goals and objectives from the February 3rd meeting. So it's clear that it's a draft. And then the suggested action is to adopt the revised goals and objectives following discussion by the city council. So I read that to mean that you could have that discussion.
Okay, Mr. Tremblay.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, what I would propose, there's something that's come to my attention, and that is the condition of the landscaping on the median on Santa Rosa Road, basically between Adolfo to Leisure Village, and then partially on Mission Oaks Boulevard as well. But when you drive that median, it's really different. When you drive Santa Rosa, it's really different than our other medians in the city because it's different because it has a compacted DG surface instead of mulch like the other medians, and there are stretches of bare decomposed granite that are missing plants, and the funding source for this is actually in potentially in maintenance district number 1A, which is our assessment district in that area that we could use potentially to include some funds to replace missing plants on Santa Rosa. And there are just some spots on there. I guess my adjective would be that median looks rather woebegone. They're just areas that need to be jazzed up a little bit and plants added. So I would specifically ask for that as a budget item for preliminary budget review under the whatever we think is the appropriate goal category. I think probably it would be under land use and transportation because it's a median.
Could we ask Mr. Klotzel? We've talked about that median for years. Could we ask him if there are any plans for it?
Yes, good evening, Council. Not any specific plans for a major effort out there. The way we've handled our landscape maintenance contract in prior years, this current year that we're under is a different story. Our budget was so restrictive that we don't have the capacity to do any what we call refurbishment, as the landscape maintenance crews are out in the city in previous years, where there would be areas where a plant or several plants would die, or we've had the case where a vehicle accident caused loss of bushes and shrubs. Through our landscape maintenance contract, we have those replaced, and essentially keep the landscaping up to the standard of number of plants and coverage that was there in the past. Santa Rosa Road, as Councilmember Tremblay mentioned, it is a different, by design, median landscape look. However, there are locations where plants have not been replaced over the years, And so there are some spots that are more barren than others. So that's where, we don't really have a plan to in place to add significant amount of additional material, but that's what, if this is proposed and moves forward, we could include in the budget this coming fiscal year efforts through our landscape maintenance contract to add or replace actually plants that are missing. And we've replaced a handful of them here and there. But there is a need in some locations that are void of plants that could stand a number of plants being added in. Again, a little bit more of a significant effort above and beyond just regular maintenance efforts, but something that we have done in the past on a limited scale, and then we could do that on a more focused approach in these locations to get those back to design as designed with additional plant material.
So, Mr. Tremblay, you're asking for a budget request. How would you like that worded so we'll know exactly what we're talking about?
Sure. The way I would give me just a second. I would say explore utilizing the available fund balance in Maintenance District 1A to improve median landscaping on Santa Rosa Road and Mission Oaks Boulevard.
Okay.
And I apologize that I didn't bring this up earlier in the month, but better late than never, I guess.
Okay, what we did on the others, if we go back to the goal setting session, which I think was February 3rd, but I could be off by a day or two. Do other council members have a feeling on this? If you support it, raise your hand. Okay, I see 3. I see 4. So let's add that to wherever staff feels is an appropriate one. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you. I think it probably would be under the budget section of the document.
Well, it might be under several of these, so.
I mean, under the goal, the land use, and whatever goal it's under, it would be in the budget, preliminary budget review component. As opposed
right, but which one of these it goes under? We'll leave that to staff.
Leave that to staff.
Okay. Okay, so with that, I think we have our goals and objectives for the coming year. And they will begin July 1st. So the next item on the agenda is Community Service Grant Program update.
Charlotte, I'm sorry. Can we go back just to, I'm sorry, I was a little bit delayed on this. But if we could go back to attachment 3, I just think we need to talk a little bit about, 1, receive further information on cannabis RD and testing business activities. Okay. My understanding is that we, from the city manager, that we may have to hire a consultant to go out and see if this is even feasible. Is that what I'm hearing? Because if that's the case, then I'm not in favor of that.
I will let the city manager answer that.
It's possible, yes. I mean, we have to do the analysis. We have to evaluate that as part of the budget process, but it is possible.
Okay, well, I have a comment on that. If that's the case, I don't quite think that I'm in favor of spending money on something that it's going to be a real, challenge to get an R&D development business to come in and do the analysis on cannabis here. I know there's our sister city to the east of us has allowed that, and they have not had any, that I'm aware of, any interest in this at all. And if we're going to spend money on a consultant, at least with our business plan, why don't we spend it on a business that we know that there's a future in and that has a real potential to come into our city? So those are my comments on that. I thought we were just going to do this in-house and see if there's any potential to have any of this in the city. But I have a real problem with going out and hiring a consultant and spending money on this, just my own opinion.
Mr. Tremblay.
Madam Mayor, I think what I would ask Mr. Ramirez is the following question. In order to just come back to the council with further information, does the city have to hire a consultant, or do you come back to us and say, we need a consultant to really look at this and we want you to spend X dollars, so we can look at it at that time and make a decision whether or not we want to do that?
Yes, exactly. That's what will actually take place prior to the budget being adopted. Yes.
So we would have a chance to look at this and decide during deliberations on the budget whether or not we want to spend whatever it would be on a consultancy fee to do this.
That's correct. I mean, it would come down to what extent our kind of amateur ability in the cannabis industry, which we actually have no expertise in, you know, to what degree that information satisfies you and what you're looking for, and or whether or not you want more information than that.
So to frame it differently, by including this in there, this is not requiring us to spend money. It's just to receive additional information on potentially whether we want to spend money.
Right, and then you'd make that decision to spend more money as part of the budget adoption. Yes.
I appreciate that clarification. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on. We will now take up the item on community service grants. We have a staff report, please.
Madam Mayor?
Mayor?
Yes.
I think we need to vote on, do we not have to vote to adopt the revised goals and objectives?
Yes, we do. We kind of agreed and we kind of disagreed, so I'll take a motion.
I move
On
that
goals and objectives.
I move that we adopt the revised Camarillo City goals and objectives for fiscal year 2021 and 22.
I'll second the motion.
Clarification. Point of clarification.
Okay, let me just say there's a motion and a second, and could I have the clarification? Could we have your question?
Yeah, Ms. Santangelo, are we voting on the revised just exclusively attachment number 2?
I believe she was talking about that, but we made a couple of changes.
Correct. So do you want to, the motion to encompass
Specify.
changes in discussion?
Susan, you broke up again and we couldn't hear what you said a minute ago.
Sorry, do you want me to specify? I mean, I said adopt the revised, and I meant as what we revised during this meeting.
So that
Mayor, perhaps I could add, the city clerk, I'm sure, has been taking note of the discussion. Perhaps she already has enough information based on the discussion to make the revisions. If not, then perhaps the motion needs to be more detailed.
let's ask the city clerk.
We've taken notes, and I know Carmen has also taken notes, so I feel confident we can create the document that you've discussed this evening. The other option is we bring you back a final draft for your review and adoption at the next meeting.
Which is,
Or we adopt it now. We can adopt it now, and I believe Sean's clarification was that we're adopting it as one document without the attachment 3. That's what he was asking for clarification on. And we understand that, so we can bring you back, we can finalize them with the direction you've provided.
Thank you.
Okay, there's a motion, there's a second. Could we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Kildee?
Yes.
Councilmember Santangelo?
Yes.
Councilmember Tremblay?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Molche?
Yes.
Mayor Craven?
Yes.
That motion carries unanimously.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is under finance. Item B, community service grant program update. We have the staff report, please.
I need to recuse myself from this. My mother serves on the board of directors of Studio Channel Islands, which is one of the awardees of a grant.
Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Uribe.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. This is a update on the Community Service Grants Program, and there are two components to this that we want to talk about, or staff to get direction on. One relates to the current fiscal year, and then one relates to next fiscal year as we are beginning our budget development process for next fiscal year. So on last March, the City Council awarded community service grants to 13 organizations totaling $65,600. And that award for those grants was for this current fiscal year that we're in. Soon after that, that was March 25th, the impacts of the COVID were starting to be felt economically and specifically on the revenues to the city. So as a result of that, when we went into the budget adoption in June, this program was not included in the budget because of the uncertainties with the pandemic and the impacts on the revenues. So fast forward about 7 months from that June adoption of the budget. Now we did 2 weeks ago a mid-year budget update where we are forecasting that the general fund will have a surplus in this fiscal year as the conditions have changed, as we're starting to see how revenues are tracking and expenditures are tracking. The result is a projection that the general fund will have a surplus. So we wanted to give council an opportunity to reconsider whether or not to add that funding of $65,600 for the grant programs that were already awarded for this fiscal year back to the budget, so that those monies could then be distributed to those nonprofit organizations. That would be the first part. Then moving forward, the second part is to give staff direction on whether to continue that program into next fiscal year. The time frame for this process typically starts in December with an informational workshop that staff conducts with some of the organizations, walking them through the program, how to complete an application. And then applications are due in January. They're reviewed by staff in February, presented to council in March for approval, and then built into the budget that gets adopted in June. So it's about a 6-month time frame for that process. So here we are towards the end of February. We wanted to get council's direction on whether they felt comfortable to move forward with this community service grant program into next fiscal year's budget so that staff can start strategizing on an accelerated approach to getting some applications in and reviewing them and presenting to council for consideration. So that concludes the report. The two suggested actions are, number one, to approve the funding for the community service grant program for this current fiscal year 2021 in the amount of $65,600. And secondly, to direct staff on the continuation of the community service grants program for next fiscal year 21-22. That I'll be happy to take any questions.
Mr. Kildee, I see your hand up.
Yes, Mr. Uribe, do we know, well, first, I generally support this, but do we know if there's going to be any proms this year? And I suppose what we could do is approve the funding, and obviously, if they don't use that funding, can roll over to the next year. But perhaps there's some other usages of that fund as well. I know I'm working with some folks about a graduation situation by trying to give the graduates perhaps some notoriety this year. But I guess, could that be how it could work if in fact they don't have the prom, that it can roll over to the next year, and or there is flexibility that we might be able to spend it in a different way?
I believe staff's recommendation is that these being discretionary funds, that we would award, distribute the funds to the grantees that were awarded, and they would find some repurposing if, for example, with the proms, if they could not conduct the prom events that it was originally planned for, that they would find some other use for these funds right now during the pandemic stages.
And that's a completely different thing than we've ever done before. In the past, we have approved specific projects. I mean, giving it to PTA general funds is a whole different thing. Anybody else have a question or a comment?
I've got some.
Assembly?
I have some comments, but is this the right time?
Sure.
mean, I generally support all of these organizations, and these are all positive causes. But breaking it down by fiscal year, for this current fiscal year, many of these grants, many of these dollars would be going to functions that aren't going to happen in this fiscal year. And having the groups repurpose the dollars to something else where we have no oversight or anything, honestly, that does not, I don't agree with that. One approach another approach, I mean, one of the approaches that was just outlined is to go ahead and award the monies and then see where things go. Another approach would be, why don't we just say, we're not going to do community service grants for this fiscal year of 2020/21. And for 21-22, and ask staff to come back with a process to consider grants for fiscal year 2021/22. That has a number of upsides to it, including from a fiscal standpoint. We would then be able to review again our budget condition toward the end of this current fiscal year. Number two, we wouldn't be subject to having some of these funds repurposed. All that said, there's one other thing I want to say. In some of these community service grants for 2020/21, some of them are sort of I don't know what term to use, pandemic impact related, and some are non-pandemic impact related. If alternatively we wanted to pick and choose among the 2020/21 community service grants and award money where the pandemic has had no impact at all, I'd be okay with discussing that. But I think the cleanest thing for us to do is just to say, let's not award community service grants in 2020/21. Let's just return to this item in 2021 for the next budget fiscal year in 21/22. And that has nothing to do with these are really great causes. I'm very supportive of them. It's a weird year in so many ways, a unique year because of this pandemic. Those would be my suggestions.
Seeing no hands, I'll say I agree with you. I could not support just giving it to several PTAs, and I'm not picking on PTAs. They were the applicants for 3, and saying, here, find another use for this money. We have been very careful with what we've given our community service grants money to. And let me remind you, this is money that all comes from the general fund. There's no other source of this. It's general fund money. And I could support not giving it this year, talking about it during the budget study session as to whether we want to next year or not, when we have a much clearer idea of how the other half of the budget year is going to go for this year, and look at them next year. We could even consider these very same ones next year instead of going through the process. Mr. Kildee, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think that, it's a good point that Mrs. Craven and Mr. Tremblay have. I think that would probably be a good way to go about this. If in fact, just by a stroke of incredible good luck, if in fact they can have a prom, is there a opportunity for them to go back to us and see if we can help fund that? Now, I know that's a real stretch. It's probably not going to happen.
Well, schools isn't in session for the secondary schools here.
Not yet. Now I
think they've said that the rest of this school year, they're not going to be in session for the secondary schools.
Okay, well, if that's the case, I was just looking in the unlikely event if there's an opportunity for us to do it. But I agree with what Mr. Tremblay and Mrs. Craven has said on that. And we can get back at this at the next year.
Mr. Malche, you have been silent.
I generally agree with everything that's been said. I want to echo Mr. Kildee's suggestion, his concern there, where if any of these programs for some off chance does somehow by miracle occur, like let's say a prom or something like that, which is the probability is very, very incredibly low. But in the event there is, I wouldn't want to dissuade them from not coming back to us on a case-by-case basis and just saying, hey, something changed, I don't know, in the world. We are able to do this thing. Would you guys still be good for supporting this particular event or this particular program or whatnot? Which I'd like to just have a little caveat and say, sure, in the event that it is for what we had already initially approved here within that scope, if something is able to occur, that maybe they can come back and ask. But aside from that, I'm fine with just proceeding to next fiscal year. Looking forward to that.
Well, if you look at the three of them, I think it's less than $10,000. So we could probably just do that no matter what. If they had proms.
Yeah, if. Big if. Big if.
Big if.
I think we have the flexibility to do that.
So is there a motion?
I'll move the staff recommendation as submitted. Actually, I'm not.
No, wait, that isn't the way what we talked about.
Sorry, I got to back up. Sorry. I'll make a motion that we do not approve the funding for fiscal year 2020, 2021. However, we do direct staff to look at the feasibility of either reinstating this or going out for new community service grants for fiscal year 21-22.
I don't hear a second to the way you said it. Would you consider having us look during the budget study session at whether we want to do this next year, depending on the budget situation?
Well, I'm just assuming that with our budget that we'd want to look into this, but we could certainly do it that way if that's what we need to get 3 votes for.
Mr. Mulchay.
Just to clarify, so the way I interpreted that was we just simply move a suggested action number 2.
We could do it that way as well.
Well, that says on the continuation, that can be yay or nay. So it needs to be worded a little differently than number 2.
Okay, so maybe we direct staff to look into a community service grant program for fiscal year 2021 and 2022.
Are we asking them to proceed with the current?
No, we're not.
I think what Mark wants to know is, does he start now asking people for applications or what?
For next year.
For next budget year?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so that's. The motion is silent on number 1.
Right.
And the motion is to direct staff to begin the process
of community service grants for programs FY 21-22.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
just a point of clarification. So, Mr. Kildee, on number 1, in essence, I'm looking at the suggested action for this current fiscal year. The understanding is that we are declining funding of the community services grants for fiscal year 2020/21. Am I correct?
That's correct.
And that's part of your motion?
That is.
Well, it doesn't have to be because there is nothing in the budget currently. It was cut.
I want to make sure that's true because this is a potential reinstatement, isn't it?
That's a reinstatement.
Okay. All right. So we're silent on number 1.
We're silent on number 1 and we're on number 2.
Okay. And can you restate the motion?
I can attempt to direct staff to start the process for community service grant programs for fiscal year 2021-22.
Second again.
Question?
Did that make sense?
Mr. Tremblay.
Is it our understanding though that if for some reason, I don't think this is going to be the case, but if for some reason we have some kind of budget cataclysm for between now and June, that we couldn't say during the course of our budget process, we're not going to do community service grants for 21, 22?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, obviously, if we have a budgetary meltdown, of course.
Right. So
We'll have that discussion in May.
Right. So the council keeps the discretion, right?
That's
Ultimately.
correct. This
Okay.
just starts the process.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I can support that.
Okay, could we have a roll call on the motion and the second?
Councilmember Kilty,
Yes.
Councilmember Tremblay,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Molche,
Yes.
Mayor Craven.
Yes.
That motion carries.
Okay, that gets us down to new business, oral communications, informational items which do not require action. And I will start with the city manager.
No items, Mayor.
City attorney.
Had to find my mute button there. All that trouble to just say no comments.
Okay. Vice Mayor Molche.
All right. Events attended. February 11th, I attended Airport Authority. The 19th, Economic Development Committee with Mr. Kildee. The 18th, an AW Association of Water Agencies Ventura County seminar. And the 22nd, CSUCI Site Authority meeting. One quick question, and I'm going to direct this to Mr. Ramirez. It doesn't require, I'm not asking for anything to get on our future agenda or anything. But I was curious, I have received, since there was the fire in the creek bed near Pleasant Valley, I think it was. So several people reached out to me and said, hey, this, we didn't get all that much rain. I don't know if we're really forecasted to get all that much rain through the rest of what is deemed to be rain season for us. People are expressing more and more concern about the riverbed and just the brush and everything in there. Can we reach out to the county and inquire with them what their plans are for further maintenance of that and helping trim or cut back or maintain some of the overgrowth in there? Because it certainly is a fire hazard. I completely understand and share some of their concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. We can reach out to them.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you. And that is all I had.
Mr. Tremblay.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. So meetings attended February 11th, the Policy Committee, and that same day, the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, the statewide Board of Directors meeting. On February 12, 2 committee meetings for MetroLink, the Executive Committee and the Contract Operations and Maintenance and Safety Committee. And then today, the Fox Canyon GMA board meeting. I knew that would get a laugh out of Madam Mayor.
I'm just happy it's you and not me.
2 things, and thankfully I'm not going to talk about the condition of the median on Santa Rosa Road. Thank God, we did that one earlier. Number 1, I would ask, and I know Councilmember Santangelo always articulates this very well, ask for everyone's continued adherence to our public health orders and guidelines, including masks and social distancing, washing of hands, etc. Progress is being made, big picture, but we want that progress and we want that trajectory to continue. We had a very sad milestone earlier this week in terms of the number of deaths nationally, so we need to do everything we can to continue to make some progress on that front, and we are starting to see some progress. The second is actually a question for city staff and for Mr. Ramirez. In light of that progress, I have had a couple of folks ask when the public might expect to see the chambers reopen so we can, I know we're all having such a good time doing these Zoom meetings, but there is a certain level of fatigue that is set in both with us, I think, or at least for myself, as well as the public. Mr. Thomas said earlier tonight that he would expect library opening or reopening when we are in the orange tier, or at least thought that that might be the case. Would that be the same type of scenario for a reopening of chambers, or just what do you see? So our council meetings can be held in public and chambers.
I think precisely that is kind of what we're looking at, is that same type of time frame, but also in concert with the other agencies in county, the county health department and whatnot, working with them closely just to verify that that would continue to be safe. But yes, that is our kind of barometer, that range, and hopefully the numbers continue to trend that way, and gets us there sooner than later. Just can't put a time frame on it yet, but we have to keep a close eye on it.
Okay, but if I'm thinking about possibly the orange tier, that might be where we go, depending on whether or not that's consistent with the orders of Dr. Levin and what other entities are doing as well, right?
Yeah, staff's preliminary review of it, we feel as though we could do that safely in that tier, with those numbers.
Okay, all right, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councilmember Santangelo.
Okay, meetings attended on February 11th, Ventura County Animal Shelter. Also on the 11th, the Airport Authority. On February 19th, I attended the CPA kickoff reception and virtual tour. And on February 23rd, the Investment and Finance Committee. So yeah, I'll give my usual COVID reminders. Today, the county announced that they are now vaccinating essential workers in phase 1B, tier 1. So that includes agricultural and food supply, education, childcare, and emergency service workers. So teachers, go get vaccinated. Everybody, but I know teachers have been really antsy about that. And so I'm really happy that we're able to start that even before March 1st, which is I think what they anticipated. There's been about 160,000 people vaccinated in Ventura County, which is one of the top in the state. That's really good. And one of the things they said this morning on the call was that their ability to vaccinate surpasses the number of vaccinations that they have. So they are able to vaccinate more people. They just need to get the goods. And they're hoping that in early March, the vaccination shipment, the doses will be increasing. Our case rate is 16.9, which still puts us in purple. We have to get to 7 to get to red. So that's sort of where we are. So yeah, we still need to practice all of those COVID guidelines and, remember that things are better, but things are still bad and we're not out of the woods. And so it's not time to get complacent. So the other thing that I just wanted to touch upon is I am sure that people have noticed that their electricity rates have gone up. And I wanted to just kind of review them in terms of what that means for CPA customers for the Clean Power Alliance. Those rate increases are directly from Southern California Edison. They have nothing to do with CPA, but CPA customers are seeing their rates increase because the part of the rate that has increased are the delivery charge and the PCIA, which gets kind of complicated, but that's basically the costs that are charged. They have to do with acquiring, with a customer changing their service. And those are Edison charges. And so if you're getting CPA, the product of the energy, that product that you're purchasing is from CPA, but it's delivered to you by Edison. So, and so, yeah, so rates have gone up. It is not due to CPA raising their rates. It looks like, I think prior to SCE's rate change, the average CPA customer bill was between 122 and 132. With the rate change, it will now look more like 135 to 145. CPA board will be looking at what they can do to help affect or to make these rate increases a little bit better for CPA customers. Don't know exactly what that looks like. There's a lot of work to be done in the next couple of months. But it's looking at rates, looking at the tiers, and perhaps making some changes to the power in each of the tiers. But more on that to come. I promise to bring that to you. But I just wanted to address that because I know I've heard a lot of people talking about how high their bills are this month. So, and that's all I have.
Mr. Kildee.
Yeah, let's start with meetings attended. February 11th, a special VRSD meeting. February 19th, an economic development and land use committee meeting with Councilmember Shea. And February 23rd, investment with Councilmember Santangelo, and February 23rd of finance with Councilmember Santangelo as well. I have a friend that just got a appointment actually to get a COVID shot at the Verdugo Way site. So I was pretty excited about that, and so is she. So that's I'm really happy to see that happening here. Also, for all the businesses out there, that there's some new COVID relief packages through the state and the federal government that I encourage those individuals that can to apply for. I've known some that actually have gotten one of the packages that actually qualified for a secondary package and received that as well. So just because you got funding once doesn't mean that you're not eligible for further funding. So I encourage businesses to look into that feasibility. And is it just me, or has there been a lot of wind this year? I mean, there's been a lot of wind this year. I can't believe it. Been one of the windier years that I can remember. Perhaps staff can come back. Or maybe they can answer it tonight if there's been any public damage due to the wind, other than, I know there's been some trees that have blown down, but maybe at a future meeting or through an email, you might be able to let us know how many trees have blown down and where they are. And hopefully we've seen the worst part of these windstorms. I hope. We need some rain. We're gonna go out and do a little rain dance or something here. I have a question too. Do the police go and check on the parks at night to see if anybody is at the parks? I don't know if Commander Tennyson's here, but perhaps Mr. Ramirez can get back to me about whether or not they do patrol the parks after dark. So with that, that's all I have tonight.
Okay, you asked about wind damage. Maybe Mr. Klotzel can give us some information on that.
Sure. Although I don't have the number of trees lost at my fingertips, I could probably get some general information on that and share that with council. But yes, we did have a number of trees down, whole trees, partial trees, a lot of debris from the winds, recent winds. No significant damage to other facilities or, like you said, public facility damages. Several of our street lights that the city owns in Old Town and our parking lot lights got whipped around pretty bad. Not any major catastrophe of anything falling over and losing completely, but there's some maintenance now that we need to do to repair some of the fixtures and bulbs from that. So, and yeah, kind of a short summary. That's about the damage that we've suffered through the winds, and somewhat typical for the year. Although that was the one event was extremely high mile an hour winds, and so I'll find a little bit more detailed information on number of trees to get an idea of the magnitude and share that with council.
Thank you. I don't see Commander Tennyson on the panelist list right now. But maybe the city manager can get back to you with information on your question about parks. I didn't attend very many meetings this time. I attended an RDP visitation with NAVFAC earlier last week, and I attended a policy committee meeting on the 11th. Today we received a letter from the Jensens about the pine trees, and I think this was the second or third letter we've gotten from them. Do I remember that we're going to be getting an item back? This is a question for the city manager, Mr. Klotzel or somebody, where we're going to be talking about parkway and median trees.
Yeah, I can shed a little bit of light on that. And if you recall, it's probably been a year or more or so. We did have a focused item at a study session a while back where we presented, the information on the condition of especially the parkway trees, the large pine trees specifically, largely on Ponderosa and some other arterial streets. And essentially laying out and confirming the understanding that unless it's for an emergency or safety related situation, we don't remove mature city street trees unless it's absolutely warranted. There are cases where there's been damage occurred to either city or a wall. And that has, in my 5 years here, that has increased over the years that we're seeing issues with those. The trees are just getting bigger and bigger, and a number of them outgrowing their size, the location available for them. So what we have started on is the initial steps to identify basically a prioritization of locations of trees where we're going to need to look at removal and then likely replacement. We want to maintain our urban forest as much as possible with the approach of having council's input and direction on that, of course, and identifying and proposing the optimal tree species for the different locations. So we are in the very initial stages of that. And we are going to be proposing actually to start to program a future project. It's part of our CIP update and development right now that council will likely see that as a proposed project for the future. It'll be a significant undertaking that'll need to be designed and verified and with input from council on how to move forward and where. There's a lot of large pine trees out there. And there's some that are higher priority than others that it would make sense to move forward with a project for a replacement program. So that's where we are on that. And we'll be bringing more information back to council. And again, you'll likely see that in the capital improvement program update as we move forward with that this year.
Thank you. I will say that I did receive my second COVID-19 vaccination last Wednesday, I guess it was, and didn't have a problem at all. And since I did talk about what a lengthy wait I had for the first one at the fairgrounds, like a 3-hour wait, I will say that their fairgrounds procedures have changed dramatically. I got there a little early, anticipating a long wait, and I was home before my scheduled time. So they did a good job. They have really changed their procedures, and I'm sure all of the public appreciates that. And then I have the last thing, and I should have asked this last time, but I somehow didn't see it in my notes. But at the January 27th meeting, during the discussion of Sterling Hills, it came to light that some of the conditions of development for the Sterling Hills had never been met. And yet they're still approved conditions of development. And I'm particularly talking about the requirement to deed over development rights for certain parts of the golf course or certain lots to the city. And so what I'm asking, not right now, but for somebody to get back to us, presumably the city attorney, and tell us how at this late date we can go about having those development rights turned over to the city. So that is all I had. If there are no other comments from council members, then we have no further business. And this meeting is adjourned and the special meeting is adjourned.